Can you give me a hug, please? Those 7 words, whispered by a trembling stranger on a cold autumn afternoon, would shatter everything Ethan Miller thought he knew about grief, loneliness, and the courage it takes to let someone in. What seemed like a simple request from a desperate young woman named Lila Hart became the beginning of something neither of them expected, a collision of 2 broken lives that would either destroy them both or prove that family isn't always about blood. It's about who stays when the world tells them to run. Stay with me until the end of this story. Hit that like button and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this journey reaches. The autumn air carried that particular kind of chill that settles deep into your bones. Not quite winter, but cold enough to make you remember every loss you've ever carried. Ethan Miller sat alone on a weathered wooden bench outside Rosie's Cafe, a small corner establishment that had somehow survived 3 recessions and the death of downtown shopping. His hands wrapped around a paper coffee cup that had long since gone lukewarm, but he held it anyway, needing something to anchor him to the present moment. 42 years old, and this was what passed for peace in his life now. 20 minutes of silence on a Saturday afternoon while his 7-year-old daughter Maya visited with his sister Jennifer inside the cafe, their laughter occasionally drifting through the glass windows like music from another world. A world where joy came easily. A world he used to inhabit before Sarah died. 3 years. 3 years, 2 months, and 16 days since the aneurysm had stolen his wife in the middle of an ordinary Tuesday. She'd been loading the dishwasher, Maya had been watching cartoons, Ethan had been upstairs folding laundry, and then Sarah was just gone. No warning, no goodbye. Just the sound of ceramic plates shattering on the kitchen floor and Maya's screams pulling him from the mundane task of matching socks to the nightmare that would reshape every moment that followed. The grief counselor had told him that eventually the sharp edges would dull, that time would soften the blow. What she hadn't mentioned was that the softening wouldn't feel like healing, it would feel like forgetting, and forgetting felt like betrayal. So Ethan lived in this strange in-between space, functional enough to parent his daughter, broken enough that moments like these, 20 minutes on a bench pretending to be a normal person, felt like climbing Everest. He watched the street with unfocused eyes. October had painted the world in shades of amber and rust. Leaves skittered across the sidewalk in small tornadoes, chasing each other into gutters and doorways. A young couple walked past, hands intertwined, laughing about something on her phone. An elderly man shuffled by with a newspaper tucked under his arm, probably heading to the same bench in the park he'd claimed for the last 30 years. Ordinary people living ordinary lives, blissfully unaware of how quickly ordinary could become impossible. Ethan took a sip of the cold coffee and grimaced. He should go inside, get a fresh cup, join his daughter and sister in whatever animated conversation was making Maya's eyes light up through the window. But moving required energy he didn't have, and the silence out here felt safer than the effort of pretending everything was fine. That's when he noticed her. At first, she was just a figure at the edge of his peripheral vision. A young woman standing near the crosswalk, not quite crossing, not quite staying. Something about her stillness caught his attention. In a world of constant motion, she stood frozen, staring at nothing in particular. Or everything. It was hard to tell. She looked to be in her mid-20s, though there was something about her that made age difficult to pin down. Her dark hair was pulled back in a loose ponytail, revealing a face that might have been beautiful if it weren't so hollowed out by whatever weight she carried. She wore a faded blue jacket that had seen better years, jeans with a frayed hem, and sneakers that had been white once upon a time. But it was her posture that struck him most, the way she held herself like someone trying to take up as little space as possible in the world. Shoulders curved inward, arms wrapped around her torso. A person trying to disappear in plain sight. Ethan looked away, feeling like an intruder on a private moment of despair. Whatever she was going through, it wasn't his business. He had enough wreckage of his own to manage without taking on a stranger's pain. That's what he told himself, anyway, as he stared down into his coffee cup and tried to find the energy to stand up and walk the 15 feet back into the cafe. But then she moved. Not toward the crosswalk or away from it, toward him. His heart did an uncomfortable lurch in his chest. Not fear exactly, but that acute awareness that comes when your solitude is about to be interrupted. He kept his eyes on his coffee, hoping she was walking past him, not to him. The universe, he'd learned, rarely granted such mercies. Her footsteps stopped directly in front of his bench. Ethan looked up slowly, and what he saw made him forget the rehearsed expressions of polite dismissal he'd been preparing. Up close, her eyes told the story her posture had only hinted at. They were dark brown, almost black, and filled with a kind of desperate exhaustion that he recognized because he'd seen it in his own mirror on the worst days. These were the eyes of someone who had been drowning for so long they'd forgotten what breathing felt like. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. Her hands were trembling, he noticed, fingers knotted together so tightly her knuckles had gone white. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. This is so strange. I know I shouldn't. I'm sorry." She turned to walk away before she'd even finished apologizing. "Wait," Ethan heard himself say, surprising them both. She stopped, her back still to him, shoulders hunched even further inward as if bracing for rejection or ridicule or whatever response she'd anticipated and decided she couldn't bear. "It's okay," he continued, his voice gentler than he'd heard it in months. "Whatever it is, it's okay." She turned back slowly, and the look on her face, hope and terror warring for dominance, made something crack open in his chest. A feeling he'd thought Sarah had taken with her. Empathy. The kind that doesn't calculate cost or convenience but just responds to another human being in pain. "Can you—" she started, then stopped, squeezing her eyes shut like she was gathering courage for a battle. "Can you give me a hug, please?" The words hung in the air between them like fragile glass ornaments, liable to shatter at the slightest breath. For a moment, Ethan couldn't process what he'd heard. Of all the things he'd expected, a request for money, for directions, for the time, this simple, devastating question hadn't even been on the list. Her eyes were still closed, tears leaking from the corners and trailing down her cheeks. She'd asked, and now she was waiting for the inevitable rejection, probably already regretting the vulnerability it had taken to voice such a need. "I'm so sorry," she said again, eyes flying open as she took a step back. "That was completely inappropriate. I don't know what I was thinking. I should go. I'm sorry for bothering you." This time when she turned to leave, she moved with purpose, her humiliation propelling her away from the bench, from him, from the mortification of having revealed too much of herself to a stranger. "Wait," Ethan said again, standing up this time. His coffee cup dropped onto the bench, forgotten. "Please, wait." She stopped but didn't turn around. He could see her shoulders shaking now, the trembling that had been confined to her hands spreading through her entire body. "What's your name?" he asked. The question seemed to catch her off guard. She turned halfway, just enough that he could see her profile, the tear tracks on her face catching the afternoon light. "Lila," she said. "Lila Hart." "I'm Ethan," he said. "Ethan Miller." Introducing themselves felt absurdly formal given what she'd asked him, but it also felt necessary. A way of making this moment real, of transforming two strangers into two people who could see each other as human beings rather than categories or assumptions. "I don't think you're strange," Ethan continued, taking a small step toward her, careful not to invade her space. "I think you're someone who needs something, and you were brave enough to ask for it. That's not strange. That's just honest." Lila turned fully toward him now, her dark eyes searching his face for signs of mockery or pity. Finding neither seemed to surprise her. "When's the last time someone hugged you?" Ethan asked, the question coming from somewhere deep and instinctive, a place that understood loneliness better than he wanted to admit. Her face crumpled. 4 years, she whispered. 4 years, 7 months, and I don't know how many days. I stopped counting. The confession broke something open in both of them. Ethan felt tears prickling at the corners of his own eyes, a response to the raw honesty of her pain. 4 years without human touch. 4 years of carrying whatever burden had carved those hollows into her face, without a single person to hold her through it. He thought of Maya, who climbed into his lap a dozen times a day, who demanded bedtime hugs and morning squeezes and random afternoon cuddles. He thought of Jennifer, who always greeted him with a tight embrace, who had held him through the worst of his grief after Sarah died. He tried to imagine 4 years without any of that warmth, that basic human connection that reminded you that you weren't alone in the universe. He couldn't imagine it. The emptiness would swallow you whole. "Come here," Ethan said quietly, opening his arms. For a second, Lila just stared at him, as if she couldn't quite believe he was serious. Then, with a sound that was half sob, half gasp, she closed the distance between them and fell into his embrace. The impact was gentle but desperate, like someone who had been treading water for so long they'd forgotten solid ground existed. She buried her face in his shoulder and shook with silent sobs, her whole body trembling with the force of whatever she'd been holding back for all those years. Ethan tightened his arms around her, one hand instinctively moving to the back of her head in the same gesture he used when Maya had nightmares. "It's okay," he murmured, his own voice thick with emotion. "I've got you. It's okay." How long they stood there, he couldn't say. Time felt elastic, stretched and compressed simultaneously. Long enough for the young couple who'd passed earlier to walk back the other way, their laughter fading as they noticed the scene on the bench and wisely gave them space. Long enough for the elderly man to shuffle past with his newspaper, his expression soft with understanding that came from decades of life and loss. Long enough for Lila's sobs to quiet into shuddering breaths, then into the kind of stillness that follows a storm. She didn't pull away immediately when the crying stopped. Instead, she stood there in his arms, clinging to this stranger who had offered her the one thing she'd been starving for: simple, uncomplicated human kindness. When she finally stepped back, her face was blotchy and tear-stained, but there was something different in her eyes. Not happiness exactly, but a kind of relief, like someone who'd been holding their breath underwater and finally broke the surface. "Thank you," she whispered. "You have no idea. Thank you." "Sit with me?" Ethan asked, gesturing to the bench. She hesitated, probably already feeling like she'd imposed too much, taken too much. But then she nodded and followed him to the bench, leaving a careful space between them as they sat. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Inside the cafe, Ethan could see Maya and Jennifer at their table, Maya gesturing wildly as she told some story, Jennifer laughing and sipping her tea. His normal life continuing without him, oblivious to the extraordinary moment happening just outside the window. "I can't believe I did that," Lila said finally, her voice still rough from crying. "Just walked up to a complete stranger and asked for a hug. Who does that?" "Someone who needed it," Ethan said simply. "Someone who was brave enough to ask." "Or desperate enough," she said, a bitter edge creeping into her voice. "Desperation looks a lot like bravery sometimes." "Maybe," Ethan conceded. "Or maybe they're the same thing. Maybe all bravery is just desperation pointed in a useful direction." She turned to look at him, really look at him, and he felt exposed under that gaze. Like she was seeing past the careful facade he'd constructed to protect himself from further pain and recognizing someone who understood loss from the inside out. "Why did you say yes?" she asked. "Most people would have thought I was crazy, or dangerous, or running some kind of scam." Ethan thought about it, trying to find words for the instinct that had overridden his usual caution. "Because I recognize something in your eyes," he said finally, "something I see in my own mirror on bad days. The look of someone who's been drowning for so long they're not even sure they want to be saved anymore. But they're still here, still trying, still asking. That's not crazy. That's the opposite of crazy." Lila's eyes filled with fresh tears, but she blinked them back, her jaw set with determination not to fall apart again. "You're going through something too," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yeah," Ethan admitted. "My wife died 3 years ago. Brain aneurysm, no warning. One minute she was there loading the dishwasher and humming along to the radio. The next minute, he trailed off, unable to finish the sentence even now. "I'm so sorry," Lila said, and the way she said it, with full understanding rather than empty platitude, made it bearable. "How about you?" he asked gently. "What brought you to that crosswalk today? What made you desperate enough to ask a stranger for what you needed?" She looked away, her fingers twisting in her lap, and he saw her wrestling with how much to reveal, how much trust to extend. The silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable, just weighted with the decision she was making. "Car accident," she said finally. 4 years and 7 months ago. Drunk driver ran a red light. My boyfriend at the time, he was driving. He walked away with a broken arm. I wasn't so lucky. She paused, and Ethan waited, letting her find her way through the story at her own pace. Shattered pelvis, broken back, traumatic brain injury. The doctor said I was lucky to survive, lucky to walk again. Lucky. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. Funny how lucky can feel like a curse when you're the one living with the aftermath. The medical bills, Ethan guessed? Astronomical, Lila confirmed. Even with insurance, which was terrible to begin with. Physical therapy, surgeries, medications, specialist appointments, it never stops. I had to drop out of college. I was in my senior year, studying to be a teacher. Couldn't afford it anymore. Couldn't handle the cognitive load with the brain injury. My parents... She stopped, pain flashing across her face. They helped at first, but my dad had his own business, and it was struggling. My mom was dealing with her own health issues. Eventually, the money ran out. The patients ran out. Everything ran out. Ethan felt anger rising in his chest, the kind of righteous fury that comes from hearing about someone being abandoned when they needed help most. But he kept his voice calm, neutral, letting her continue. They told me I needed to be more independent, that I was bringing everyone down with my problems, that if I just tried harder, thought more positively, I could overcome all of it. Her hands had formed fists in her lap. As if positive thinking could magic away nerve damage and chronic pain and medical debt that would take 3 lifetimes to pay off. Jesus, Ethan breathed. And Derek, my boyfriend, he stuck around for about 6 months after the accident. But I wasn't the same person anymore. I couldn't do the things we used to do. Couldn't go hiking or dancing or any of the adventures he loved. The pain, the fatigue, the cognitive issues. I became a burden instead of a partner. He tried to hide it, but I could see it in his eyes. The resentment, the impatience, the way he looked at me like I'd broken some kind of promise to stay whole and healthy and fun. She took a shuddering breath, and Ethan noticed she was massaging her left hip unconsciously, a gesture that spoke to chronic pain so constant she probably didn't even realize she was doing it. He left eventually, told me I needed to focus on my recovery and he didn't want to be a distraction, which was a nice way of saying he didn't sign up to date someone broken. The bitterness in her voice could have cut glass. My friends drifted away too. Couldn't handle how I'd changed. Couldn't deal with canceling plans at the last minute when my pain was too bad. Eventually they stopped inviting me to things, stopped calling, stopped checking in. So you've been alone, Ethan said quietly. Completely, Lila confirmed. Living in a studio apartment I can barely afford, working part-time retail when my body cooperates, trying to stretch food stamps and disability payments to cover everything. No family, no friends, no one who touches me or hugs me or even shakes my hand. Just doctors with clinical touches and strangers bumping into me on the bus. For 4 years and 7 months. The confession seemed to exhaust her. She sagged against the bench, looking smaller somehow, as if telling the story had cost her whatever energy she'd been running on. And today? Ethan prompted gently. What made today different? Lila was quiet for so long he thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. Today is my 27th birthday, she said. And I woke up this morning and realized I couldn't remember the last time someone touched me with kindness. Not medical necessity or transactional politeness, but actual human warmth. And I thought maybe if I could just have one hug from anyone, it might remind me what it feels like to be human. To be seen as a person worth touching, not just an inconvenience or a liability or a patient. Tears were streaming down her face again, but her voice remained steady. So I walked to the cafe where I used to come with Derek, back when I was a different person. And I was going to order a coffee and sit alone on my birthday and try not to think about how completely isolated my life has become. But then I saw you sitting here, and there was something about you, I don't know what, that made me think you might understand. That you might not judge me or laugh at me or call me crazy. She turned to look at him, her eyes red-rimmed but clear. And you didn't. You didn't do any of those things. You just gave me what I asked for. So thank you for making my birthday bearable, for reminding me that kindness still exists somewhere in the world. Ethan felt his throat tighten with emotion. Here was someone who had lost everything, health, family, love, community, and yet she was thanking him for a simple hug. The injustice of it, The profound wrongness of a world that could leave someone so thoroughly abandoned made him want to rage against something, anything. But rage wouldn't help her. What she needed was what she'd asked for, to be seen, to be treated with dignity and compassion, to be reminded that her worth as a human being didn't depend on her productivity or her independence or her ability to be fun and adventurous. "It's your birthday," he said, an idea forming. "Have you eaten?" She looked startled by the question. No, not yet." "Then let me buy you lunch," Ethan said. "My daughter's inside with my sister. We were just going to grab sandwiches here before heading home. Join us, please." "No one should be alone on their birthday." Lila's eyes widened. "I couldn't possibly—" "You could," Ethan interrupted gently. "And you should, unless you don't want to, which is absolutely fine. But if the only thing stopping you is feeling like you're imposing, then I'm telling you right now you're not. You'd actually be doing me a favor." "How would I be doing you a favor?" she asked, skepticism and hope warring in her expression. "Because," Ethan said honestly, "I've been sitting in my grief for 3 years, going through the motions of living without actually connecting to anything or anyone outside my daughter. And you just reminded me what it means to really see someone else's pain and respond to it. That's a gift. So let me say thank you by buying you a birthday lunch." Before Lila could respond, the cafe door swung open and a small tornado of energy burst out onto the sidewalk. "Daddy!" Maya called out, her dark curls bouncing as she ran toward the bench. "Aunt Jenny says we have to order now or they're going to run out of the good cookies, and I need you to come inside right now because this is a cookie emergency." She skidded to a stop in front of them, only now noticing Lila. Maya's eyes, the same warm brown as Sarah's had been, took in the stranger with frank curiosity. "Who are you?" Maya asked with the blunt directness of 7-year-olds everywhere. "Maya, manners," Ethan said automatically, but he was smiling. "It's okay," Lila said, and Ethan was surprised to see a small smile touch her lips, the first he'd seen from her. "I'm Lila. I was just talking with your dad." "Are you sad?" Maya asked, because of course she'd noticed the tear tracks on Lila's face. "You look sad." "Maya," Ethan said more firmly. "I was sad," Lila said, her voice soft but steady. "But your dad helped me feel a little better." "That's good," Maya said with a satisfied nod. "Daddy's good at making people feel better. When I'm sad, he gives the best hugs in the whole world. Did he give you a hug?" "He did," Lila confirmed, and something in her expression made Ethan's heart twist. "Are you coming to eat with us?" Maya asked. "Because Aunt Jenny ordered too many sandwiches and Daddy always says we shouldn't waste food." Ethan caught Jennifer's eye through the cafe window. His sister was watching the scene with interest, her expression curious but not judgmental. She raised her eyebrows at him in a silent question. He gave a small nod. "Would you like that?" Ethan asked Lila. "I promise my daughter and sister are much better company than I am." Lila looked at Maya, who was staring up at her with the kind of open, uncomplicated friendliness that only children can manage. Then she looked at Ethan, and he saw her making a choice, to risk a little more vulnerability, to accept a little more kindness, to step toward connection instead of retreating into the familiar safety of isolation. "Okay," she said quietly, "if you're sure I'm not intruding." "You're not," Ethan assured her. "Yes!" Maya cheered, grabbing Lila's hand without hesitation. "Come on, you have to meet Aunt Jenny and help me pick which cookie to get, because there are chocolate chip and oatmeal raisin, and it's the hardest decision ever." Lila let herself be pulled toward the cafe, glancing back at Ethan with an expression that was equal parts terrified and grateful. He followed behind them, picking up his abandoned coffee cup from the bench, his mind racing with the strangeness of the last 20 minutes. A woman had asked him for a hug. He'd said yes, and now she was holding his daughter's hand and walking into Rosie's cafe like she belonged there, like this was normal, like the universe hadn't just tilted on its axis in a way he didn't quite understand yet. Inside the cafe, the warmth hit him immediately, both the temperature and the atmosphere. Rosie's had been a fixture in the neighborhood for 40 years, surviving on good coffee, better sandwiches, and the kind of genuine hospitality that made people want to linger. The walls were decorated with local art, The tables mismatched in a way that felt charming rather than chaotic, and the smell of fresh bread and brewing coffee created an atmosphere that felt like coming home. Jennifer stood as they approached, her expression warm but curious. At 45, she was 3 years older than Ethan, with the same dark hair and blue eyes, but a face that hadn't been carved by quite as much tragedy. She'd been his rock since Sarah died, showing up with casseroles and patience and unconditional love for both him and Maya. "Jenny, this is Lila," Ethan said. "Lila, my sister Jennifer." "Call me Jenny," his sister said, extending her hand. "Any friend of Ethan's is welcome." Lila shook her hand, and Ethan noticed how carefully Jenny took note of Lila's tear-stained face and fragile posture without making it obvious she'd noticed. "And I'm Maya," his daughter announced, still holding Lila's other hand. "I'm 7 3/4, and I'm in 2nd grade, and my favorite color is purple, and I like horses, even though I've never ridden one, and someday I want to be an astronaut or maybe a veterinarian. I haven't decided yet." "Those are both excellent options," Lila said seriously, and Maya beamed. They settled into a booth, Maya insisting that Lila sit next to her, with Ethan and Jenny across from them. A college-age server with bright pink hair and a nose ring came over with menus and water, chatting easily about the daily specials before leaving them to decide. Ethan watched Lila pick up the menu with trembling hands, saw her eyes widen slightly at the prices, and felt his chest constrict. He could almost see her doing calculations in her head, trying to figure out what the absolute cheapest thing she could order would be, probably already regretting accepting his invitation. "Order whatever you want," he said quietly, catching her eye. "I mean it. It's your birthday. Get what actually sounds good, not what costs least." She looked like she might argue, but Maya chose that moment to lean over and start pointing out all her favorite menu items, completely oblivious to the adult dynamics playing out around her. By the time the server returned, Lila had been talked into the Turkey Club sandwich and sweet potato fries, which Maya assured her were the best fries in the universe, no exaggeration. As they waited for their food, Maya dominated the conversation with the enthusiastic energy of a child who never met a silence she couldn't fill. She told Lila about school, her best friend Sophie, her new teacher Mr. Peterson, who had a beard like a wizard, and the upcoming fall festival where she wanted to enter the pumpkin decorating contest but couldn't decide if she should paint her pumpkin or bedazzle it. "Why not both?" Lila suggested, and Maya's eyes went wide like she'd just received divine revelation. "You're a genius," Maya declared. "Maya, Daddy, can I do both? Paint and bedazzle?" "I don't see why not," Ethan said, unable to suppress his smile at his daughter's enthusiasm. "This is going to be the best pumpkin ever," Maya said with absolute conviction. "Lila, will you come see it at the festival? It's in 2 weeks and everyone brings food and there are games, and last year they had a petting zoo with baby goats and they were so cute I almost died." "Maya, Lila might be busy," Ethan started, trying to save her from feeling obligated. "I'd love to," Lila said quietly, surprising them all. If that's okay." "Of course it's okay," Maya said. "It's a public festival. Anyone can come. Right, Daddy?" "Right," Ethan confirmed, meeting Lila's eyes across the table and seeing the vulnerability there, the fear that she was overstepping, combined with the desperate hope that the invitation was genuine. The food arrived, and for a while conversation gave way to eating. Ethan noticed Lila take her first bite of the sandwich like someone who hadn't had a good meal in longer than she wanted to admit. She closed her eyes briefly, and he saw her throat work as she swallowed, fighting back emotion over something as simple as a well-made sandwich. Jenny, perceptive as always, caught his eye and raised an eyebrow. A silent question about who this woman was and what was happening here. He gave a tiny shake of his head. "Later," he mouthed. Jenny nodded and went back to her soup, but he could feel her curiosity radiating across the table. "So Lila," Jenny said conversationally, "have you lived in the area long?" It was an innocuous question, the kind of small talk people made all the time. But Ethan saw Lila tense slightly, saw her trying to formulate an answer that wouldn't reveal too much about her circumstances. "About 4 years," Lila said. "I moved here after—" She paused, glancing at Maya. "After some changes in my life." "Do you work nearby?" Jenny asked. I work at the Riverside Pharmacy, Lila said. Part-time. Retail. Oh, I know that place, Maya chimed in. They have the really good cough drops that taste like cherries instead of medicine. Daddy always gets them there when I'm sick. We do have those, Lila confirmed, and Ethan was grateful for his daughter's ability to turn even the most mundane topics into enthusiastic conversation. The meal continued, tension gradually easing as Maya's chatter filled the spaces, and Jenny's warmth created an atmosphere of acceptance. Ethan watched Lila slowly unfold, not completely, but enough that he could see glimpses of who she might have been before the accident, before the abandonment, before 4 years of isolation had taught her to make herself as small as possible. When the server brought the check, Ethan grabbed it before anyone else could reach for it, waving away Lila's protests. It's your birthday, he said firmly. The rule is birthday people don't pay. Is that a rule? Maya asked. Because my birthday is in March, and I definitely didn't pay then, but I'm 6 and I don't have money, so maybe that doesn't count. 7, Ethan corrected automatically. You're 7 3/4, remember? Oh yeah, Maya said. I always forget now that I'm 7. Being 7 is so much more grown up than being 6. Lila laughed, actually laughed, and the sound was like light breaking through clouds. Ethan found himself smiling at her, this stranger who had walked into his afternoon and somehow made it feel less heavy than it had in months. Outside the cafe, they stood in an awkward cluster on the sidewalk, that moment where parting feels imminent, but no one quite knows how to say goodbye. Thank you, Lila said, directing it at all of them, but her eyes landing on Ethan. For the food, for the company, for everything. You have no idea how much this meant to me. Do you have to go? Maya asked, her small face scrunched with disappointment. Can't you come home with us? We're going to watch a movie and make popcorn, and Daddy always lets me stay up late on Saturdays. Maya, Ethan said gently. It's okay, Lila said, crouching down to Maya's level despite the visible effort it cost her. I would love that, but I have some things I need to do today. But thank you for asking. That was really kind. Will I see you again? Maya asked with the directness that made adult social conventions irrelevant. Lila looked up at Ethan, uncertainty written across her face. At the fall festival, Ethan heard himself say. If you still want to come, it's 2 weeks from today. 2 o'clock at Riverside Park. I'll be there, Lila said, standing back up slowly, one hand going to her hip again in that unconscious gesture of pain. I promise. They exchanged phone numbers, Lila's hands shaking as she typed Ethan's contact information into a phone that had clearly seen better days. When she walked away down the sidewalk, moving with a slight limp that hadn't been as noticeable before, Maya waved until Lila was out of sight. I like her, Maya announced. She's sad like you sometimes are, Daddy, but nice. Can she be our friend? I hope so, sweetheart, Ethan said quietly, watching Lila's figure disappear around the corner. I really hope so. As they drove home, Maya chattering in the back seat about pumpkin decorating strategies while Jenny sat in thoughtful silence, Ethan's mind kept returning to that moment on the bench, to Lila's trembling voice asking for something so simple it broke his heart, to the way she'd felt in his arms, like someone who'd been starving for human connection for so long she'd almost forgotten how to accept it. He thought about her birthday, 27 years old and completely alone. He thought about Sarah, who'd had family and friends surrounding her in her final moments, who'd never had to wonder if anyone cared whether she lived or died. He thought about his own isolation since her death, the way grief had taught him to push people away, to keep himself carefully separate from anything that might hurt. And he thought about how, for 20 minutes on a bench outside Rosie's cafe, 2 broken people had found each other in the wreckage and offered each other the simple grace of being seen. He didn't know what would come next. Didn't know if Lila would actually show up at the festival or if fear would convince her to protect herself by disappearing. Didn't know if this was the beginning of something or just a single moment of connection in an otherwise isolated life. But he knew that when she'd asked him for a hug, something inside him had responded, something he'd thought had died with Sarah. The ability to look at another person's pain and choose to step toward it instead of away. The capacity for compassion that didn't calculate cost or convenience. Maybe, he thought as Jenny quizzed Maya about her homework for the week, Maybe that was enough for now. Maybe all any of them could do was take one small step toward each other and hope it led somewhere that felt like home. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He glanced at it at a red light. Thank you for today, for treating me like a person, for giving me the best birthday I've had in years, for reminding me that kindness still exists. Lila Ethan felt his throat tighten with emotion. He typed back quickly. Thank you for being brave enough to ask for what you needed. See you at the festival. The light turned green. He drove toward home, toward the rest of his Saturday, toward all the ordinary moments that made up a life. But something had shifted. Some small crack had appeared in the careful walls he'd built around his heart. And through that crack, unexpectedly, improbably, light was beginning to seep in. The 2 weeks between that Saturday afternoon and the fall festival felt both endless and impossibly brief. Ethan found himself checking his phone more than he wanted to admit, watching for messages from Lila that came sporadically. Brief updates about her day, a photo of the sunset from her apartment window, a question about what kind of glitter would work best for pumpkin bedazzling. Each message was tentative, as if she was testing whether he'd really meant the invitation or if she'd imagined the kindness. He always wrote back, sometimes with practical answers, sometimes with questions about her life, sometimes just with encouragement to keep going through what he was beginning to understand were very difficult days. He learned that her chronic pain was worse in the mornings, that she loved old movies but rarely had the energy to watch them, that she'd once dreamed of teaching elementary school and still sometimes saw children's books at thrift stores and had to walk away before the grief of what she'd lost could swallow her whole. Maya asked about Lila every single day. Is it festival time yet? When is Lila coming? Do you think she likes horses? Should we bring extra popcorn in case she's hungry? The questions tumbled out with the relentless optimism of childhood, undimmed by adult concerns about whether Lila would actually show up or whether this fragile connection would survive contact with reality. Jenny had cornered Ethan 3 days after their lunch at Rosie's, showing up at his house with a bottle of wine and a look that said she wasn't leaving until he explained. So, she'd said, pouring them both generous glasses and settling onto his couch like she owned it. Who was she really? The woman at the cafe. And don't give me some sanitized version. I saw her face, Ethan. I saw yours too. He told her everything. About Lila's request for a hug, about the 4 years of isolation, about the accident and the abandonment, and the loneliness so profound it had driven her to approach a stranger on the street. Jenny had listened without interrupting, her expression shifting from curiosity to concern to something that looked like fierce protectiveness. You like her, Jenny had said when he finished. It wasn't a question. I barely know her, Ethan had protested. That's not what I asked. Jenny had fixed him with the same look she'd used when they were kids, and she'd caught him in a lie. You like her. And you're terrified because liking someone means opening yourself up to loss again. Jenny, I'm not saying it's a bad thing, his sister had interrupted gently. I'm saying it's a human thing. Sarah's been gone for 3 years, Ethan. At some point, you have to decide if you're going to keep living or just going through the motions until Maya grows up and you can stop pretending. The words had stung because they were true. He had been going through motions. Wake up, make breakfast, take Maya to school, go to work at the accounting firm where numbers provided safe distance from feeling anything real, pick Maya up, make dinner, help with homework, bedtime routines, collapse into bed, and do it all again. A loop of survival that kept him functional but not alive. What if I hurt her? He'd asked quietly. What if I'm not ready and I make her hope for something I can't give? She's been through enough, Jenny. She doesn't need me adding to her pain. What if she helps you heal? Jenny had countered. What if you help each other? Life doesn't come with guarantees, little brother. You can protect yourself from getting hurt by never letting anyone in, but that's not protection. That's just a slower way of dying. Now, standing in Riverside Park on a crisp October afternoon with Maya bouncing beside him and the smell of kettle corn and cider donuts filling the air, Ethan scanned the crowd for a face he'd only seen once but somehow couldn't forget. The festival was in full swing, families clustered around game booths, children running with face paint and balloons, a local band playing bluegrass on a makeshift stage near the pond. Do you see her? Maya asked, standing on her tiptoes like the extra 2 inches would help her spot Lila in the sea of people. What if she doesn't come? What if something happened? She'll come, Ethan said with more confidence than he felt. She promised. But as 15 minutes became 30 and 30 stretched toward 45, doubt began creeping in. Maybe Lila had woken up this morning and decided that connecting with them was too risky, too complicated, too likely to end in disappointment. Maybe her pain was too bad today. Maybe she'd convinced herself that she'd imagined the warmth of their lunch, that she was better off staying in the familiar territory of isolation where expectations couldn't hurt her. There, Maya suddenly shrieked, pointing toward the park entrance. Daddy, there she is! Ethan followed his daughter's finger and felt his chest tighten. Lila was walking through the gate, moving slowly and scanning the crowd with an expression that wavered between hope and terror. She wore the same faded blue jacket from before, but her hair was down today, falling past her shoulders in dark waves. Even from a distance, he could see her tension, the way she held herself like someone preparing for rejection. Lila! Maya shouted, waving both arms over her head like she was flagging down a rescue plane. We're over here! Lila's face transformed when she spotted them. The anxiety melted into something that looked like relief mixed with joy, and she raised one hand in a tentative wave. As she made her way through the crowd, Ethan noticed her limp was more pronounced today, her left hand occasionally reaching for her hip in that gesture he'd come to recognize as managing pain. You came, Maya said when Lila reached them, stating the obvious with the delighted enthusiasm of someone who genuinely worried about the outcome. I promised, didn't I? Lila said, and her smile, shy but genuine, made something warm unfold in Ethan's chest. I'm glad you're here, he said simply. Me too, Lila replied, and the way she said it made him think she was surprised by her own truthfulness. The afternoon unfolded with the easy chaos of a small-town festival. Maya dragged them from booth to booth, insisting they try the ring toss. Ethan failed spectacularly. Lila surprised them both by winning a small stuffed bear, which she immediately gave to Maya. The duck pond. Maya picked number 17 and won a whistle she immediately began testing despite Ethan's protest. And the face painting booth where Maya emerged as a purple butterfly with glitter that would definitely end up all over his house for the next 6 months. Through it all, Lila seemed to slowly relax. Not completely. There was still a watchfulness to her, an awareness that this happiness was fragile and could shatter at any moment, but enough that Ethan caught glimpses of who she must have been before life had taught her that joy was temporary and pain was constant. Your turn, Maya announced when they reached the pumpkin decorating contest area, which had been set up under a large tent with rows of tables covered in paint, glitter, stickers, and every craft supply imaginable. Maya's pumpkin sat on their designated table space, a medium-sized beauty she'd selected with the gravity of someone choosing a gemstone. For the next hour, they helped her execute her vision of a purple and silver glitter explosion with hand-painted swirls and stick-on rhinestones that caught the light like tiny stars. This is amazing, Lila said, carefully applying glue to another section while Maya pressed glitter into place with intense concentration. I don't think I've ever seen a more glamorous pumpkin. It's going to win first place for sure, Maya declared with the absolute confidence of childhood. Everyone else's pumpkins are going to be so jealous. I don't think pumpkins can feel jealousy, sweetheart, Ethan said, dabbing paint on Maya's nose and making her giggle. These pumpkins can, Maya insisted. Look at them. They know mine is the best. At some point during the decorating frenzy, Lila had ended up with purple paint on her cheek and silver glitter in her hair, looking more alive than Ethan had seen her. She was laughing at something Maya said, her whole face lit up with genuine amusement, and he had to look away from the brightness of it before the wanting became too obvious. I need to wash my hands, Maya announced, examining her glitter-covered fingers with satisfaction. They have bathrooms by the food trucks, right, Daddy? Right over there, Ethan confirmed, pointing. Can you go by yourself or do you need me to come? Maya gave him a look of profound 7-year-old exasperation. I'm not a baby. I can go to the bathroom by myself. I'll be right back. Guard my pumpkin. She scampered off before he could insist on accompanying her, leaving Ethan and Lila alone for the first time since the cafe. An awkward silence descended, filled with the ambient noise of the festival, but somehow feeling separate from it. She's wonderful, Lila said finally, watching Maya's retreating figure with an expression Ethan couldn't quite read. You're doing an amazing job with her. Most days I feel like I'm just barely keeping my head above water, Ethan admitted. But she makes it easier, gives me a reason to get up and keep going even when everything feels impossible. She talks about her mom sometimes, Lila said carefully. Sarah, Maya told me while we were picking out glitter that her mommy is in heaven and can see her from there. She said it so matter-of-factly, like it was just another piece of information about her life. Ethan felt the familiar ache in his chest, the one that never quite went away when Sarah came up in conversation. She was 3 when Sarah died. Old enough to remember, but young enough that the memories are already fading. Sometimes she asks me questions. What did Mom's voice sound like? Did Mom like butterflies? Would Mom be proud of her spelling test score? And I try to keep Sarah alive for her, to make sure she knows her mother loved her. But there's this fear that someday Maya's memories will just be my stories, not her own experiences. That must be terrifying, Lila said softly. It is, Ethan agreed. But Jenny, my sister, she reminds me that stories matter. That even if Maya's direct memories fade, she'll carry Sarah with her through the stories we tell, the values Sarah held, the love that shaped her first 3 years. I have to believe that's enough. They were quiet for a moment, both watching the activity around them. Parents helping children, couples walking hand in hand, the band transitioning into a cover of an old folk song that drifted across the park. Can I ask you something? Lila said, her voice hesitant. And you can tell me if it's too personal or if I'm overstepping. Ask, Ethan said. Why did you say yes? She asked, not quite meeting his eyes. That day at the cafe, when I asked for a hug, most people would have thought I was dangerous or crazy or running a scam, but you didn't even hesitate. Why? Ethan thought about it, trying to find words for something he'd acted on more from instinct than conscious decision. I saw myself in you, he said finally. Not the specific circumstances. Your pain is yours, and I won't pretend to fully understand it, but the isolation, the feeling of being cut off from basic human connection, that I understood. After Sarah died, people didn't know what to say to me, so eventually they stopped saying anything. They stopped calling, stopped inviting us to things, stopped treating me like a normal person, and started treating me like a tragedy they were uncomfortable being around. He ran his hand through his hair, a nervous gesture left over from childhood. Jenny stuck around. A couple of old friends check in sometimes. But mostly it's been me and Maya in our own little bubble, going through the motions of normal life while feeling completely separate from it. So when you asked for a hug, when you admitted that basic need out loud, it felt like the bravest and most honest thing I'd heard in years. And I wanted to honor that honesty with honesty of my own, which was that, yes, I understood what it felt like to be starving for connection. And yes, I could give you what you were asking for. Lila's eyes were bright with unshed tears. I almost didn't approach you, she confessed. I stood at that crosswalk for 20 minutes, arguing with myself, convincing myself it was a terrible idea and I should just go home. But something about the way you were sitting there, so alone in the middle of everything, made me think you might understand, that you might say yes. I'm glad you were brave enough to ask, Ethan said. I'm glad you were kind enough to answer, Lila replied. Maya's return broke the moment, her hands now clean but her face sporting a new smear of something that looked suspiciously like chocolate frosting. They have chocolate donuts, she announced. Can we get some? Please? Lila, have you had the chocolate donuts here? They're so good you'll want to cry happy tears. I don't think I've ever cried happy tears over a donut, Lila said, laughing. But I'm willing to try. They got donuts. Maya insisting Lila needed to try the chocolate while also sampling the apple cider and the pumpkin-flavored options for comparison purposes. They found a spot on the grass near the pond, spreading out Ethan's jacket as a makeshift picnic blanket, and ate while Maya provided running commentary on everything happening around them. That dog is wearing a costume, she said, pointing at a golden retriever in a hot dog outfit. Do you think dogs like wearing costumes, or do they just tolerate it because humans think it's cute? Probably the second one, Ethan said. That's what I thought, Maya said sagely. People don't always think about what others actually want. They just do what makes them feel good. The observation, startlingly perceptive for a 7-year-old, hung in the air. Lila caught Ethan's eye, and he saw his own thought reflected there. Sometimes children saw the truth of things more clearly than adults who'd learned to complicate everything with self-protection and fear. As the afternoon wore into early evening, the festival began to shift moods. The families with young children started packing up and heading home. The band transitioned from bluegrass to slower folk songs. String lights that had been invisible in daylight flickered on, transforming the park into something magical. They were walking back from seeing Maya's pumpkin officially entered in the contest when Lila stumbled. It was subtle, her left leg simply giving out mid-step, but Ethan caught her arm before she could fall. "Sorry," she said immediately, her face flushing with embarrassment. "My leg does that sometimes. Nerve damage from the accident. I'm fine." But Ethan could see she wasn't fine. Her face had gone pale, and she was breathing more carefully, the way people do when they're managing significant pain. "Do you need to sit down?" he asked quietly. "I should probably get going anyway," Lila said, not quite answering the question. "I've been on my feet longer than usual today. I don't want to ruin the afternoon by turning into a burden." "You're not a burden," Ethan said firmly. "But if you're in pain, let's find somewhere you can rest for a bit. The band is about to start their evening set, and Maya has been begging to stay for it. Sit with us, and when you're ready to go, I'll drive you home." "I can take the bus," Lila started. "Lila," Ethan interrupted gently. "Let someone help you. Please." She looked like she wanted to argue, but Maya chose that moment to tug on Lila's other hand. "Please stay," his daughter said. "The evening music is the best part. They play the slow, pretty songs, and sometimes people dance, and it's so romantic. Daddy says romantic means when people really like each other." "That's one definition," Ethan said, fighting back a smile. "Please?" Maya tried again, deploying her most effective weapon, the puppy dog eyes that Ethan had never successfully resisted in 7 years of parenting. "Okay," Lila conceded, "but just until the music starts." They found a spot on one of the benches near the pond, close enough to hear the band clearly but far enough from the speakers that conversation was still possible. Maya wedged herself between them, swinging her legs and humming along with songs she didn't know the words to. As the sun sank lower, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Ethan noticed Lila relaxing again, some of the tension leaving her shoulders as the pain presumably eased. She had her eyes closed, face tilted toward the last rays of sunshine, and in the golden light she looked younger, more like the college student she'd been before the accident than the broken woman who'd asked a stranger for a hug 2 weeks ago. "This is nice," she said quietly, opening her eyes and catching him watching her. "I'd forgotten what it feels like to just be somewhere, with people, without constantly worrying about whether I'm welcome or when I'll have to leave." "You're welcome," Ethan said, "for as long as you want to stay." Maya had started to get drowsy, the combination of fresh air, physical activity, and a stomach full of donuts catching up with her. She leaned against Lila's side, her eyes drifting closed as she fought to stay awake for the music she'd insisted they needed to hear. "She's falling asleep," Lila whispered, looking down at Maya with such tenderness it made Ethan's throat tight. "She does this," he said. "Insists she's not tired right up until she passes out. I'll carry her to the car when we're ready to go." "She's lucky to have you," Lila said. "A dad who brings her to festivals and lets her bedazzle pumpkins and carries her when she's tired. A lot of kids don't have that." "I'm the lucky one," Ethan said honestly. "She's the reason I got out of bed for the first 6 months after Sarah died. The reason I kept going even when everything felt impossible. She needed me, so I couldn't give up. Sometimes I think she saved my life without even knowing it." The band transitioned into a slow instrumental piece, something with violin and acoustic guitar that felt like melancholy and hope braided together. Around them, couples had indeed begun to dance. Nothing formal, just swaying together in the grass as the evening deepened into night. "I used to love dancing," Lila said wistfully. "Before the accident, Derek and I would go to this club downtown every Friday night. Not fancy dancing, just moving to music and laughing and feeling young and invincible. I haven't danced in 4 years, can't anymore really. My balance is too unpredictable, and the pain makes it impossible to move the way I used to." "What kind of music did you dance to?" Ethan asked. "Anything with a good beat," Lila said, smiling at the memory. "Pop, hip-hop, old rock songs. Didn't matter as long as it made you want to move. Derek always said I danced like no one was watching even when everyone was. I thought it was a compliment. Looking back, I think maybe he was embarrassed by how unself-conscious I was. That says more about him than you, Ethan said. There's nothing embarrassing about joy, about being fully present in a moment. I know that now, Lila said, but at the time when he left, I convinced myself that I was too much. Too dramatic, too emotional, too damaged, too everything. I spent a long time trying to be smaller, quieter, less needy, trying to be someone who wouldn't drive people away. It didn't work. They left anyway. Turned out the problem wasn't that I was too much, it was that I was asking for basic humanity from people who weren't capable of giving it. Maya had fully fallen asleep now, her small body warm against Lila's side, one hand curled loosely around Lila's arm. Lila looked down at her with such longing it was almost painful to witness. I wanted children, she said softly. Before the accident, I was studying to be a teacher because I loved kids, loved the way they saw the world with fresh eyes, and asked impossible questions and believed in magic. I thought I'd have a classroom full of students and then go home to my own kids someday. Build a life full of noise and laughter and sticky hands and unconditional love. She paused, her jaw tightening against emotion. After the accident, the doctor said pregnancy would be dangerous for me. Not impossible, but risky enough that they didn't recommend it. Between the nerve damage and the medications and the structural issues with my pelvis, it was just one more thing the drunk driver took from me. One more future that died on that road. Ethan didn't know what to say to that. There were no words that could make it better, no platitude that could ease the weight of dreams destroyed by someone else's reckless choice. So he just reached over and took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers in a gesture of solidarity and shared grief for all the futures that should have been. She squeezed his hand gratefully, tears sliding silently down her cheeks as the music swelled and the darkness settled around them like a blanket. They sat like that for a long time. Lila holding Maya, Ethan holding Lila's hand, all three of them connected in this moment of quiet understanding. Around them, the festival continued. People laughed and danced and lived their lives. But in their small circle of three, time felt suspended, holding space for the grief and hope and tentative connection none of them had been looking for, but all of them desperately needed. When the band finally took a break, Maya stirred and blinked sleepily up at them. "Did I miss the music?" she asked, disoriented. "You heard some of it," Ethan said, "but then you decided a nap was more important." "I wasn't napping," Maya protested, yawning. "I was resting my eyes." "Of course," Ethan said seriously. "My mistake." "We should probably head home," he added, glancing at Lila. "And I'm still driving you. No arguments." This time, Lila didn't protest. She let Ethan help her to her feet, wincing slightly as weight transferred to her left leg. Maya held her hand as they walked slowly through the thinning crowd toward the parking lot, chattering about whether her pumpkin would win and what costume she should wear for Halloween, and did Lila want to help her pick it out. "I'd love that," Lila said, and Maya beamed. In the car, Maya fell back asleep almost immediately, strapped into her booster seat in the back. Ethan pulled up the GPS for Lila's address, a part of town he recognized as not quite dangerous, but definitely struggling, the kind of neighborhood where people lived because it was all they could afford, not because they chose it. The drive took 15 minutes, most of it in comfortable silence. When they pulled up to her building, a 3-story brick apartment complex that had probably been nice in the 1970s but now showed its age in peeling paint and cracked walkways, Lila didn't immediately get out. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For today. For including me. For treating me like I matter." "You do matter," Ethan said firmly. "And this doesn't have to be a one-time thing, Lila. If you'd like to spend more time together, with us, we'd like that too." He could feel his heart hammering, aware he was offering something that went beyond casual friendship, that opened the door to something neither of them had names for yet. "I'd like that," Lila said, her voice trembling slightly. "But Ethan, I need you to understand something. My life is complicated. The medical stuff, the financial stress, the limitations on what I can do physically, it's not going to get better. This is who I am now, And I don't want you to think you're signing up for one thing and then realize later that it's more than you bargained for. I've been the burden that people couldn't handle before. I won't do that to you, to Maya. You're not a burden, Ethan said, turning to face her fully. You're a person who's been through hell and survived it, who has the courage to keep showing up even when the world keeps knocking you down, who asked for what you needed instead of pretending you didn't need anything. That's not weakness, Lila. That's strength. You might feel differently when, she started. I won't, Ethan interrupted. Look, I'm not going to pretend I have all the answers or that this will be simple. Grief and trauma have a way of complicating everything. But what I know for certain is that meeting you, spending time with you, seeing Maya light up around you, it's reminded me what it feels like to be alive instead of just surviving. And I hope, maybe we're reminding you of the same thing. Lila was crying again, but this time it felt different. Not the desperate sobs of that first afternoon, but something softer, like ice beginning to thaw. What if I hurt you? She whispered. What if I'm not strong enough or good enough, or what if you are? Ethan countered gently. What if we stop asking, what if, about all the ways this could go wrong, and start asking, what if, about the ways it could go right? She laughed through her tears, shaking her head. You make it sound so simple. It's not simple, Ethan admitted, but maybe it doesn't have to be as complicated as fear wants to make it. They sat there in the car, the engine ticking as it cooled, Maya sleeping peacefully in the back seat, and something shifted between them. An acknowledgement of possibility. A tentative agreement to stop protecting themselves quite so fiercely and see what happened when two broken people decided to be broken together instead of alone. Okay, Lila said finally. Let's try. Whatever this is, let's try. Yeah? Ethan asked, hope blooming warm in his chest. Yeah, Lila confirmed, smiling through her tears. He walked her to her apartment door, waited while she unlocked it, and said goodnight with a promise to text her in the morning. As he drove home with Maya still sleeping in the back, Ethan felt something he hadn't experienced in 3 years. Something that felt dangerously close to happiness. The weeks that followed the festival felt like watching something fragile and beautiful grow and fast forward. Lila became a regular presence in their lives, woven into the fabric of their daily routines in ways that felt both surprising and inevitable. She came over for dinner on Wednesday nights, her contributions always modest. A loaf of bread from the day-old rack, a bag of apples she'd gotten on sale, but offered with such careful dignity that Ethan learned to accept them graciously rather than protest that she didn't need to bring anything. Maya adored her with the uncomplicated intensity of childhood. She would run to the door when Lila arrived, talking before Lila had even crossed the threshold about her day at school. A funny thing Sophie said at lunch, a new book Mr. Peterson was reading to the class. Lila listened to every word like Maya was recounting the most fascinating story ever told, asking follow-up questions and remembering details from previous conversations in a way that made Maya feel truly seen. Lila remembers everything, Maya had told Ethan one night after Lila left. Not like when grown-ups pretend to listen, but they're really thinking about other stuff. She actually remembers that I said the butterscotch pudding at lunch was gross, and today she asked if they served it again, and I said yes, and she made the same yucky face I did. She gets it, Daddy. She gets me. Ethan understood what his daughter meant, because he felt it too. Lila had a way of being present that was becoming increasingly rare in a world of constant distraction. When you talked to her, she looked at you, actually looked, like your words mattered, and she wanted to understand not just what you were saying, but what you meant underneath the words. They fell into patterns. Friday nights became movie nights. The three of them piled on Ethan's couch with popcorn and whatever animated film Maya had selected. Lila would sit on one end, Maya in the middle, and Ethan on the other end, and somewhere during the movie, Maya would shift until she was half on Lila's lap, half on Ethan's, creating a bridge between them that felt symbolic of something neither adult was quite ready to name yet. Saturday mornings, if Lila wasn't working, she'd come over and help Maya with art projects. They'd spread newspapers across the kitchen table and pull out paints and markers and whatever craft supplies Ethan had accumulated through years of birthday parties and school events. Lila had a creative streak that Maya brought out, Together they'd made a mobile of painted leaves, a collage of magazine cutouts forming a dragon, a series of watercolor paintings that Maya insisted needed to be hung in the hallway like a real art gallery. On the Saturdays when Lila did have to work, Maya would count the hours until she got off, already planning what they'd do together the next day. Ethan would catch his daughter staring out the window around the time Lila usually arrived, her face falling with disappointment before brightening again as she remembered tomorrow was coming. "I think Maya might love her more than she loves me," Ethan had joked to Jenny during one of their regular phone calls. "Kids know who's safe," Jenny had replied, her voice knowing. "Maya lost her mother. She's found someone who makes her feel secure and cared for and special. That's not replacing Sarah, Ethan. That's Maya healing. You both are." The words had settled something in Ethan's chest, permission he hadn't realized he needed, because he was healing too, in ways that felt both wonderful and terrifying. Lila's presence in his life had begun to fill spaces he'd convinced himself would stay empty forever. The house felt less like a museum to Sarah's memory, and more like a home where life was happening again. He caught himself laughing more, not the polite laughter of social obligation, but genuine amusement that bubbled up spontaneously. He learned Lila's tells, the small signs that indicated how she was feeling on any given day. If she moved slowly in the mornings, her left hand pressing into her hip, it meant the pain was bad and she'd probably need to sit more than usual. If she was quiet and withdrawn, staring at nothing with unfocused eyes, it meant the cognitive effects of her brain injury were worse. The fog that made thinking feel like wading through mud, that stole words from her mouth mid-sentence and left her frustrated and embarrassed. On those hard days, Ethan learned not to push for conversation or activity. He'd set up the couch with pillows and blankets, put on one of the old movies Lila loved, and let her just exist without pressure to be anything other than what she was in that moment. Maya, with the intuitive empathy of children, would curl up next to Lila and stay quiet, offering her presence as comfort without demanding anything in return. "You don't have to do this," Lila had said one particularly difficult Saturday when her pain had been so bad she'd shown up at his door in tears, apologizing for ruining their plans. "You and Maya shouldn't have to rearrange your life around my medical disasters." "We're not rearranging anything," Ethan had told her, guiding her to the couch and helping her settle into a position that minimized the pain. "We're just being with someone we care about who's having a hard day. That's what people do for each other." "Not in my experience," Lila had said bitterly. "Then your experience has been with the wrong people," Ethan had replied simply. It was during these quiet moments, when Lila's defenses were lowered by pain or exhaustion, that Ethan saw glimpses of the depth of trauma she carried. Not just the physical injuries, but the psychological wounds left by everyone who'd abandoned her when she stopped being convenient. The way she apologized constantly for things that didn't require apology. The way she flinched when she thought she'd inconvenienced someone, already bracing for rejection. The way she hoarded food in her purse because years of food insecurity had taught her you never knew when your next meal might come. He'd noticed the food thing one evening when Maya had offered Lila the last cookie from the batch they'd baked, and Lila had wrapped it carefully in a napkin and tucked it into her purse instead of eating it. "You can have it now," Maya had said, confused. "They taste better when they're fresh." "I know, sweetie," Lila had said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "But I like to save treats for later. Makes them last longer." But Ethan had seen the truth in the tight set of her shoulders, the way her fingers had trembled slightly as she'd put the cookie away. This wasn't about making treats last. This was about survival instincts developed when you weren't sure where your next meal was coming from, when disability payments and part-time retail wages barely covered rent and medication, when food pantries became regular stops, and every scrap mattered. That night, after Maya had gone to bed and Lila was getting ready to leave, Ethan had packed up the remaining cookies plus some leftovers from dinner and handed her the container. "For later," he'd said simply, cutting off her protest before it started. "I made too much, and it'll go bad if someone doesn't eat it." The look she'd given him, gratitude mixed with shame mixed with relief, had broken something in his chest. No one should have to feel grateful for basic food security. No one should have to wrap cookies in napkins and hide them in purses because they couldn't trust that there would be enough. He'd started being more intentional after that, making sure there were always leftovers when Lila came for dinner, always extra groceries he'd accidentally bought that she could take home. He learned to frame it as her doing him a favor. Maya won't eat this kind of pasta. Can you use it? Or, I grabbed the wrong kind of bread. You'd be helping me out if you took it. Because Lila would accept help if she thought she was helping someone else, even when it was obvious the pretense was exactly that. As November arrived and the days grew shorter, Ethan realized that what had started as simple friendship had evolved into something deeper and more complex. He found himself thinking about Lila at odd moments during the day, wondering if her shift at the pharmacy was going okay, whether her pain was manageable, if she remembered to eat lunch. He kept his phone close, always hoping for one of her random texts, a photo of something interesting she'd seen, a question about what Maya might like for her upcoming birthday, a simple thinking of you that made his whole day brighter. Maya had started referring to their household as we, a pronoun that automatically included Lila. We should go to the library this weekend, she'd say. We need to get a bigger turkey for Thanksgiving because Lila's coming. We could make Halloween costumes together instead of buying them. The easy assumption that Lila was part of their family unit felt simultaneously right and terrifying. Ethan had been so careful for 3 years not to let anyone get too close, not to risk Maya's heart or his own on someone who might leave. But Lila had slipped past his defenses without even trying, and now the thought of her not being in their lives felt unimaginable. He was contemplating this one Thursday evening in early November, loading the dishwasher while Maya did homework at the kitchen table and Lila sat nearby, helping her sound out challenging words in her reading assignment. The domesticity of the scene, the comfortable silence broken only by Maya's occasional questions and Lila's patient answers, felt like something he'd thought he'd lost forever when Sarah died. His phone rang, shattering the peaceful moment. The caller ID showed Richard Sterling, Sarah's father. Ethan's stomach dropped. His in-laws rarely called anymore, the relationship having grown increasingly strained since Sarah's death. Richard and Patricia had never quite forgiven him for surviving when their daughter hadn't, as if grief was a competition he'd somehow won by still being alive. I need to take this, Ethan said, grabbing the phone and stepping into the living room. Hello, Richard. Ethan. His father-in-law's voice was clipped, formal. Patricia and I need to speak with you. It's about Maya. What about her? Ethan asked, already tensing against whatever was coming. We've been hearing things, Richard said, from friends who live in your neighborhood, about a woman who's been spending a considerable amount of time at your house, around our granddaughter. Ethan's jaw tightened. Her name is Lila. She's a friend. A friend, Richard repeated, skepticism dripping from every syllable. Ethan, our granddaughter has already lost her mother. We're concerned about you introducing unstable influences into her life. Unstable influences? Ethan's voice came out harder than he'd intended. You don't know anything about Lila. We know enough, Patricia's voice cut in. She must have been on speakerphone. We know she's significantly younger than you, that she works part-time retail, that she has ongoing medical issues. We know she's been in your home regularly around Maya, and we're concerned about what kind of example this sets for our granddaughter. The example it sets, Ethan said, his anger building, is that people who've been through hard times deserve kindness and support. That disability doesn't make someone less worthy of friendship and community. We'd like to meet her, Richard interrupted. Before this goes any further, dinner at our house this Sunday. You, Maya, and this Lila person. If she's going to be around our granddaughter, we have a right to know who she is. It wasn't a request. It was a demand wrapped in the veneer of grandparental concern, with the unspoken threat that refusal would have consequences. I'll ask her, Ethan said through gritted teeth, but I won't force her if she's not comfortable. 6 o'clock Sunday, Richard said. Don't be late. The line went dead. Ethan stood in the living room, phone still pressed to his ear, rage and anxiety warring in his chest. He could hear Maya and Lila in the kitchen, their voices a soft murmur of normalcy that felt 1,000 miles away from the ugliness of the phone call. When he returned to the kitchen, both of them looked up. Maya's expression was curious, but Lila's had shuddered completely. She'd heard enough to know the call hadn't gone well. Everything okay? She asked quietly. Can we talk? Ethan said. After Maya goes to bed? Lila nodded, but something had shifted in her posture, that familiar tension returning as she prepared for whatever blow was coming. The next hour felt interminable. They finished Maya's homework, went through the bedtime routine, read the required 2 stories. When Maya finally fell asleep, Ethan found Lila in the living room, perched on the edge of the couch like someone ready to run. "That was Sarah's parents," Ethan said, sitting down next to her. "They've heard that you've been spending time here with Maya. They want to meet you. Dinner on Sunday." Lila's face had gone pale. "They don't want to meet me," she said, her voice flat. "They want to evaluate me, judge whether I'm good enough to be around their granddaughter." "Lila? And I'm not going to pass their evaluation, am I?" She stood up abruptly, starting to pace. "Part-time retail worker with massive medical debt and disability issues. No college degree, no prospects, living in a crappy apartment in the bad part of town. I'm exactly the kind of person rich grandparents don't want around their precious granddaughter." "You're the kind of person who makes Maya light up when you walk in the room," Ethan said firmly. "The kind of person who listens to her stories and remembers details and helps her feel special and loved. That's what matters." "That's not what will matter to them," Lila said, and there was such defeat in her voice it hurt to hear. "I know how this goes, Ethan. I've been the person who wasn't good enough before. I don't think I can do it again." "Then don't come," Ethan said. "I'll tell them you're not available, that it's not their business who I'm friends with or who spends time in my home." "And they'll hold it against you," Lila said. "Against Maya. They'll use it as proof that you're making poor decisions, that maybe their granddaughter isn't safe with you. I've seen it happen, Ethan. Grandparents with money and lawyers who decide the surviving parent isn't fit. I won't be the reason you lose custody of your daughter." The thought hadn't even occurred to him, but now that Lila had voiced it, cold fear settled in his gut. Richard and Patricia had never explicitly threatened legal action, but they'd made their disapproval of his parenting clear enough. Adding fuel to that fire by refusing their request could have consequences he couldn't afford. "So we go," Ethan said. "We have dinner. We show them that you are a good person who cares about Maya, and then they back off." "You really believe it will be that simple?" Lila asked, her expression skeptical. "No," Ethan admitted, "but I believe you're strong enough to handle whatever they throw at you, and I'll be right there beside you." Lila looked at him for a long moment, fear and determination warring in her expression. Finally, she nodded. "Okay, Sunday dinner. But Ethan, if this goes badly, if I say or do something that makes things worse for you and Maya, I need you to promise me you'll put distance between us. Your relationship with your daughter is more important than whatever this is between us." "Don't," Ethan said, standing and crossing to where she stood. "Don't start planning the exit before we've even walked through the door. We face this together, and we'll deal with whatever happens together." But even as he said the words, doubt gnawed at him. Richard and Patricia Sterling were formidable people, used to getting their way through a combination of money, social position, and sheer force of will. They'd been civil enough in the aftermath of Sarah's death, focused on their own grief. But as time passed, and Ethan's parenting choices diverged from their expectations, the civility had worn thin. They disapproved of his decision to keep Maya in public school instead of the private academy where Sarah had gone. They questioned his choice to remain in his modest house rather than accept their offer to buy him something larger in a better neighborhood. They made pointed comments about Maya's wardrobe, her activities, the amount of screen time he allowed. Every interaction was a subtle criticism, a reminder that he would never measure up to their standards for raising their granddaughter. And now he was bringing Lila into that hostile environment, asking her to subject herself to their judgment, while he couldn't guarantee he could protect her from it. Sunday arrived too quickly. Ethan spent the morning trying to project calm he didn't feel, while Maya chattered excitedly about seeing her grandparents. She'd been too young when Sarah died to remember the early days of grief, when Richard and Patricia had been more present. Now they were distant figures who sent expensive gifts on birthdays and Christmas, but rarely made the hour drive to visit in person. Lila arrived at 4:30, giving them time to drive to the Sterling house together. She'd clearly put effort into her appearance, hair neatly styled, wearing a simple blue dress that was probably the nicest thing she owned, minimal makeup that couldn't quite hide the dark circles under her eyes that spoke to a sleepless night. But her hands were shaking as she got into the car, and Ethan reached over to squeeze one gently. "We've got this," he said. I hope you're right, Lila replied, but her voice lacked conviction. The Sterling house was exactly what Ethan had described to Lila, a sprawling colonial in an exclusive gated community, all manicured lawns and expensive cars in circular driveways, old money and older attitudes where worth was measured in country club memberships and prestigious college degrees. Maya pressed her face to the window as they drove through the gate. Wow, she breathed. I always forget how big Grandma and Grandpa's house is. It's very big, Lila agreed, and Ethan heard the nervousness underneath her attempt at normal conversation. Richard answered the door himself, tall and silver-haired in expensive casual wear that probably cost more than Lila's monthly rent. His smile for Maya was genuine, but his eyes went cold when they landed on Lila. You must be Lila, he said, extending his hand with the warmth of someone greeting a door-to-door salesman. Richard Sterling. It's nice to meet you, Lila said, shaking his hand despite the obvious lack of welcome. Patricia appeared behind her husband, impeccably dressed and coiffed, her expression a masterclass in polite disdain. Come in, she said. Dinner will be ready shortly. The house was as intimidating inside as outside. High ceilings, expensive art, furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum rather than a home. Maya skipped ahead to the sunroom where her grandparents kept a toy box for her visits, oblivious to the tension crackling through the adults. Drinks? Richard offered, moving to a bar cart that probably held liquor worth more than Ethan's car. Water is fine, Lila said quickly. Wine for me, Ethan said, deciding he needed fortification for whatever was coming. They made excruciating small talk in the living room, Richard asking pointed questions about Lila's background, Patricia making observations about the neighborhood Lila lived in with barely concealed horror. Lila answered everything with careful honesty, her posture growing more rigid with each question that felt more like an interrogation than conversation. And you work in retail? Patricia asked, the word retail pronounced like it tasted bad. Part-time at Riverside Pharmacy, Lila confirmed. It's flexible around my medical appointments. Yes, Ethan mentioned you have ongoing health issues, Richard said. Nothing contagious, I hope. The question was so outrageously rude that Ethan nearly choked on his wine. But Lila just smiled tightly and said, No, nothing contagious, chronic pain and mobility issues from a car accident 4 years ago. How unfortunate, Patricia said in a tone that suggested she found it more inconvenient than unfortunate. Dinner was a carefully orchestrated nightmare. Patricia had prepared an elaborate meal clearly designed to showcase the gulf between her world and Lila's. Multiple courses, expensive wine, foods that required specialized knowledge to eat properly. Ethan watched Lila navigate the array of silverware and crystal glasses with growing anxiety, saw her hands tremble slightly as she tried to remember which fork was for which course. Maya, blessedly, filled the silences with cheerful chatter about school and her friends and the Halloween costume Lila had helped her create. But even Maya's enthusiasm couldn't fully dispel the oppressive atmosphere of judgment that permeated the room. So Lila, Richard said as they finished the main course, what are your intentions regarding my son-in-law and granddaughter? The question landed like a bomb in the middle of the table. Ethan's fork clattered against his plate. Richard, he said, his voice tight with anger. It's a fair question, Richard continued, his eyes never leaving Lila. You've been spending significant time in their home, around a young child who's already experienced profound loss. We simply want to understand what role you see yourself playing in their lives. Lila's face had gone white, but she met Richard's gaze directly. I see myself as their friend, she said quietly. Someone who cares about both of them and wants to support them however I can. And when your health issues interfere, like Patricia asked? When Maya becomes attached to you and then you're unable to be present because of medical crises, have you considered how that might affect a child who's already lost her mother? That's enough, Ethan said, his voice sharp enough that Maya looked up from her plate with worried eyes. We're simply trying to protect our granddaughter, Richard said. Surely you can understand our concern about exposing her to instability. Lila is not instability, Ethan said firmly. She's been nothing but kind and supportive and wonderful with Maya. This interrogation is completely inappropriate. Is it? Patricia set down her wine glass with careful precision. Because from where we sit, It appears you're introducing Maya to a woman with significant medical and financial baggage, someone who works part-time retail and lives in a dangerous neighborhood. Is that really the kind of influence you want in your daughter's life?" The contempt in her voice, the casual cruelty of reducing Lila to her worst circumstances and calling them baggage, made Ethan's vision narrow with rage. But before he could respond, Lila spoke. "You're right," she said quietly. Everyone turned to stare at her. "Lila," Ethan started, but she held up a hand to stop him. "You're right," she repeated, looking at Patricia. "I do have medical issues that sometimes interfere with my life. I do work part-time in retail because that's all my body can handle. I do live in an apartment in a struggling neighborhood because that's what I can afford on disability payments. All of that is true." She took a shaky breath, and Ethan saw tears gathering in her eyes, but her voice remained steady. "What's also true is that I love spending time with Maya, that I would never do anything to hurt her, that some of the best moments of my life in the past 4 years have been making art with her and listening to her stories and helping her feel special and loved, that I know what it's like to lose everything, so I understand how precious what Ethan and Maya have together really is." Patricia's expression hadn't softened, but Lila pressed on. "You're worried about me being unstable. I've survived things that would have destroyed most people. A car accident that should have killed me. Injuries that left me with permanent disabilities, being abandoned by everyone I thought would stand by me. Years of poverty and pain and isolation. And I'm still here. I'm still trying. Still showing up even when it's hard. Still hoping that maybe kindness and connection matter more than money or status or being able-bodied." She turned to look at Ethan, and the love in her expression made his chest ache. "Your son-in-law and granddaughter gave me that hope back. They treated me like I mattered when the rest of the world had convinced me I didn't. So yes, I'm poor and disabled and living in a bad neighborhood, but I'm also loyal and caring and so grateful to be part of their lives that I would do anything to protect what we have together, including walking away if that's what's truly best for Maya." The silence that followed was deafening. Maya had abandoned her food entirely, watching the adults with wide, confused eyes. Richard and Patricia sat frozen, clearly not having expected Lila to respond with such raw honesty. "Lila doesn't have to walk away," Maya said suddenly, her small voice cutting through the tension. "I don't want her to. She's my friend. She makes me happy." "Why are you being mean to her, Grandma?" "Maya, sweetheart, we're not being mean," Patricia started, but Maya cut her off. "Yes, you are," Maya insisted, her eyes filling with tears. "You're talking about her like she's not even here, like she's bad because she doesn't have a lot of money. But Daddy always says money doesn't make people good or bad. People's hearts make them good or bad, and Lila has the best heart." She slipped out of her chair and ran to Lila, climbing into her lap despite the formal dining room setting. "Please don't leave," she whispered, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I love you." Lila's composure finally cracked. She wrapped her arms around Maya and buried her face in the little girl's hair, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. And watching them together, this woman who'd been broken by life and this child who'd lost her mother, finding comfort in each other, Ethan felt something crystallize in his chest. He stood up, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "We're leaving," he announced. "Ethan," Richard started. "No," Ethan said firmly. "We're done here. You wanted to meet Lila, to evaluate whether she's good enough to be around Maya. Well, you've met her. And if you can't see what Maya sees, that she's kind and loyal and brave, then that's a failure of your judgment, not her worth." He moved to Lila and Maya, helping them both to their feet. Lila kept her face turned away, clearly trying to hide her tears, but Ethan put a hand on her shoulder in solidarity. "Maya needs stability," Patricia said, standing as well. "And this relationship, whatever it is the opposite of stable." "What Maya needs," Ethan said, his voice quiet but steel-edged, "is to be surrounded by people who love her unconditionally, who show up for her, who teach her that worth isn't measured in bank accounts or perfect health, but in how we treat each other when things are hard. Lila does all of that. You, apparently, do not." Richard's face had gone red. "You're making a mistake, Ethan. Choosing this woman over your daughter's welfare." "I'm not choosing between them," Ethan said. "I'm choosing both of them. And if you can't accept that, If you're going to keep treating Lila like she's beneath us because she's had the audacity to survive tragedy, then maybe it's time to reevaluate how much time you spend around Maya, because I won't let you teach my daughter your brand of conditional love." They left without dessert, without further conversation, Maya's hand in Lila's, and Ethan leading the way. The drive home was silent, except for Maya's occasional sniffles. When they pulled into Ethan's driveway, nobody moved immediately. "I'm so sorry," Lila finally said, her voice wrecked. "I should never have come. I made everything worse." "You didn't make anything worse," Ethan said firmly. "They did, and I'm sorry I put you through that." "Can Lila stay?" Maya asked from the back seat. "Please, I don't want her to go home and be sad by herself." Ethan looked at Lila, seeing exhaustion and heartbreak written across her face. "You don't have to," he said quietly. "But if you want to stay, we'd like you to." Lila nodded, not trusting her voice, and let them lead her inside. They settled into the living room like survivors of a storm, each processing what had just happened in their own way. Maya curled up next to Lila on the couch, her small body pressed close, as if proximity alone could prevent anyone from taking her friend away. Ethan sat in the armchair across from them, his mind racing through the implications of what he'd said to his in-laws, the bridge he might have just burned. "I ruined everything," Lila said after a long silence, her voice hollow. "They're going to use this against you. They'll say you're choosing an inappropriate relationship over Maya's welfare." "There's nothing inappropriate about caring for someone," Ethan said firmly, "and they don't get to dictate who's part of our family." "But they're her grandparents," Lila pressed. "They have rights, money, lawyers. What if they—" "They won't," Ethan interrupted, though he couldn't quite suppress the threat of doubt in his own voice. "Richard and Patricia are many things, but they're not cruel enough to try to take Maya from me. They just need time to adjust to the idea that I'm allowed to have a life beyond mourning their daughter." Maya had been quiet through this exchange, her eyes moving between the adults like she was watching a tennis match. Now she spoke up, her voice small but determined. "I don't care what Grandma and Grandpa think. Lila's not bad. She's good. And she makes Daddy smile again like he used to before Mommy died." The observation, delivered with such simple clarity, made both adults fall silent. Ethan hadn't realized Maya had noticed, that she'd been aware of how much of his joy had disappeared with Sarah. Children saw everything, he realized, even the things adults tried to hide. "Come here, sweetheart," he said, and Maya scrambled off the couch to climb into his lap. He wrapped his arms around her, breathing in the strawberry scent of her shampoo. "I need you to know something. Whatever happens with Grandma and Grandpa, whatever they say or do, it doesn't change how much I love you. You're the most important person in my world. You always will be." "I know that, Daddy," Maya said, tilting her head back to look at him with Sarah's eyes. "But Lila's important too. She's part of our family now." "Maya," Lila started, her voice cracking. "You are," Maya insisted, turning to look at her. "Family doesn't have to be people who are related. Mr. Peterson told us that when we were learning about different kinds of families. He said family is people who love you and take care of you and show up even when things are hard. That's you, Lila. You're our family." Lila pressed her hand to her mouth, trying to hold back sobs, but they came anyway, great shuddering breaths that shook her whole body. Maya climbed down from Ethan's lap and went back to the couch, wrapping her small arms around Lila with the fierce protectiveness of someone much older. "Don't cry," Maya whispered. "It's okay. We're not going to let anyone take you away from us." Ethan watched them together, this child and this woman who'd both experienced profound loss, offering each other comfort in a way that transcended words. And he realized that Maya was right. Lila had become family, had woven herself into the fabric of their daily lives so completely that imagining her absence left a hole he didn't know how to fill. The question was whether he was brave enough to acknowledge what that meant, whether he was ready to risk his heart again after spending 3 years protecting it behind walls of grief and routine. They got Maya ready for bed together, the familiar rituals feeling especially precious after the disaster of the evening. Pajamas, teeth brushing, the negotiation over how many stories she was allowed. Lila read tonight, her voice still rough from crying but growing steadier as she lost herself in the tale of a brave mouse on an impossible quest. When Maya finally drifted off, they retreated back to the living room. Ethan poured them both generous glasses of wine, and they sat in silence for a long moment, processing. "I should probably go," Lila said eventually, though she made no move to stand. "Stay," Ethan heard himself say. "Please, just for a while longer. I don't want you to be alone tonight." Lila looked at him, really looked, and he saw the question in her eyes. What were they to each other? What was this thing that had grown between them over movie nights and art projects and shared dinners? Where did friendship end and something else begin? "What are we doing, Ethan?" she asked quietly. "Really? Because I need to know. I need to understand what this is before I let myself hope for something that isn't real." Ethan set down his wine glass and moved to sit beside her on the couch. "Honestly, I don't know exactly what this is. All I know is that you've become essential. That my day feels incomplete if I don't hear from you. That watching you with Maya makes me believe in goodness again. That when you hurt, I hurt. When you smile, I feel it in my chest like sunshine." He reached for her hand, lacing their fingers together. "After Sarah died, I convinced myself that was it for me. One great love in a lifetime, and I'd had mine. Everything else would just be going through the motions until Maya grew up and didn't need me anymore. But then you asked me for a hug on a random Saturday afternoon, and something shifted. You reminded me that I'm still alive, still capable of feeling something other than grief." "I'm terrified," Lila admitted, tears sliding down her cheeks again. "Of letting myself need you, and then losing you. Of becoming a burden you'll eventually resent. Of Maya getting attached and then my health failing in some catastrophic way and breaking her heart. I've lost so much already, Ethan. I don't know if I can survive losing this too." "So we're both terrified," Ethan said, both convinced we're going to ruin this somehow. "Maybe that's okay. Maybe fear means we understand how precious this is." "Your in-laws hate me," Lila said. "They think I'm dragging you and Maya down." "Then they're wrong," Ethan said simply. "You're not dragging us anywhere. If anything, you've been pulling us back toward life, toward connection, toward actually feeling things instead of just existing." "What if they take legal action?" Lila asked, voicing the fear that had been lurking underneath everything. "What if they try to get custody of Maya because of me?" "They won't," Ethan said with more confidence than he felt. "Richard and Patricia are concerned grandparents, not monsters. They'll calm down. Give them some time." But even as he said it, doubt gnawed at him. He knew his in-laws well enough to understand that they didn't back down easily when they believed they were right. And they'd made their position crystal clear. They saw Lila as a liability, a threat to Maya's well-being, someone Ethan should cut from their lives immediately. The week that followed the disastrous dinner proved Ethan's optimism premature. On Tuesday, he received an email from Richard's attorney requesting a meeting to discuss concerns regarding the welfare of the minor child, Maya Miller. On Wednesday, Patricia showed up unannounced at Maya's school, attempting to pick her up early for what she called a grandmother-granddaughter day, until the school contacted Ethan to confirm permission, which he firmly denied. By Friday, Jenny was standing in his kitchen, waving a sheaf of legal documents that had been delivered to her house by mistake. "They're actually doing it," she said, her face pale. "Richard and Patricia have filed for emergency custody. They're claiming you're in an unstable relationship with someone who poses a risk to Maya's emotional and physical well-being." Yeet. The words hit like a physical blow. Ethan sank into a chair, the room tilting around him. "They can't. They have no grounds. They have money and lawyers and affidavits from neighbors who witnessed Lila coming and going from your house at all hours," Jenny said, reading from the documents. "They're painting it as you prioritizing a romantic relationship over your daughter's needs. They're using Lila's medical history, her financial situation, even her age against you." "This is insane," Ethan said, his hand shaking as he took the papers from Jenny. "Lila has been nothing but good for Maya, for both of us." "I know that," Jenny said gently, "but courts care about stability and established norms. A widowed father introducing his young daughter to a new romantic partner with significant health and financial issues, refusing to listen to the grandparents' concerns, they're going to frame that as impulsive and potentially harmful." "It's not romantic," Ethan protested, then stopped. "Was it?" They'd been so careful not to label what was happening between them, to keep everything in the safe territory of friendship, even as the feelings grew deeper and more complicated. "Ethan," Jenny said carefully, Are you in love with her? The question hung in the air. Ethan thought about Lila's laugh, the way she listened to Maya's stories like they were the most important thing in the world, how she brought light into the gray spaces his grief had created. He thought about her courage in surviving circumstances that would have destroyed lesser people, her kindness despite having every reason to be bitter, the way his chest felt lighter when she was near. Yes, he said quietly. I think I am. Then you need to tell her, Jenny said, because this is about to get ugly, and she deserves to know what she's walking into, what you're willing to fight for. But when Ethan called Lila that evening, when he tried to explain about the custody filing and the legal battle that was coming, she went very quiet on the other end of the line. This is my fault, she said finally. I'm the reason they're doing this. If I just step back, if I'm not in the picture anymore, they'll drop it. Lila, no. Think about it, Ethan, she interrupted, her voice eerily calm. What's more important, me being in your life or you keeping custody of your daughter? Because those might be mutually exclusive now, and we both know which one has to win. Don't do this, Ethan said, panic rising in his chest. Don't make this choice for us. Someone has to, Lila said, and he could hear tears in her voice now. Someone has to be rational instead of hopeful. I love Maya too much to be the reason she loses her father. I love you too much to watch you sacrifice your daughter for me. You love me? Ethan asked, latching onto the word she'd let slip. A long pause. Yes, Lila whispered. I love you. I've loved you since that first hug, I think. Since you looked at me like I was a person worth seeing instead of a problem to avoid. But love isn't enough, Ethan. Not when it costs a little girl her home and her stability. So what are you saying? Ethan asked, though he already knew, could feel the answer coming like a wave he had no way to stop. I'm saying I need to step back, Lila said, her voice breaking. I can't see you or Maya anymore. I can't be the weapon your in-laws use to take her from you. It's better if I just disappear, let things settle down, give you the chance to fight this without me being ammunition against you. That's not better, Ethan said desperately. That's not better for anyone. It's better for Maya, Lila said firmly. And she's what matters most. We both know that. Lila, please. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry. Tell Maya I love her. Tell her this isn't her fault, that she's the best thing that's happened to me in years. Tell her... Her voice broke completely. Tell her I wish I could have been strong enough to stay. The line went dead. Ethan stood in his kitchen, phone still pressed to his ear, and felt something inside him shatter. He tried calling back, texted, sent emails. All of it went unanswered. By Saturday morning, when he drove to Lila's apartment building against his better judgment, her neighbor informed him that she'd left early that morning with a suitcase, wouldn't say where she was going or when she'd be back. She'd really done it, really walked away, chosen sacrifice over fighting, convinced herself that her absence would fix everything. Maya took it the hardest. When Ethan told her that Lila needed some time away, that she wouldn't be coming over for a while, his daughter's face had crumpled in a way that reminded him painfully of those first terrible months after Sarah's death. Did I do something wrong? Maya asked, her voice small. Is she mad at me because of what happened at Grandma and Grandpa's house? No, sweetheart, Ethan said, pulling her into his arms. You didn't do anything wrong. This is complicated adult stuff that has nothing to do with you. But I told her I loved her, Maya said, crying into his shoulder. I said she was family, and now she left just like everyone else who loves us leaves. The observation cut deeper than anything his in-laws had said, because Maya was right. In her short life, people she loved had a habit of disappearing. Her mother had died. Grandparents who should have been present kept their distance. Friends from preschool had moved away. And now Lila, who'd promised to come to the fall festival and had kept every promise since, had vanished without explanation. She didn't want to leave, Ethan tried to explain. She thought she was protecting us. That's stupid, Maya said with the blunt honesty of childhood. You protect people by staying with them, not by going away. That's not protection. That's just being sad and alone. Out of the mouths of babes, Ethan thought. His 7-year-old daughter had understood in seconds what Lila's trauma had convinced her was necessary, that disappearing didn't protect anyone. It just spread the pain around differently. The preliminary custody hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks out. Ethan hired a lawyer, a sharp woman named Monica Chen, who specialized in family law and came highly recommended by Jenny's network. Monica was optimistic but realistic. "They don't have much of a case," she told him during their first meeting. "You're a fit parent. Maya is thriving. There's no evidence of neglect or abuse. But they have resources, and they're painting a narrative about impulsive decisions and putting your love life before your daughter's needs. If we can show stability, routine, that you've made thoughtful choices in Maya's best interest, we'll be fine." "And Lila?" Ethan asked. "If I'm honest that I care about her, that I want her in our lives." Monica had considered this carefully. Caring about someone isn't a crime, but right now she's their strongest argument, that you're involving Maya with someone unstable. If she's not in the picture, if you can show you put Maya first by maintaining distance, it weakens their position considerably. So the strategy became clear. Pretend Lila had been a brief lapse in judgment. Minimize her importance. Focus on his record as a parent over the past 3 years. Show the court that he was stable, thoughtful, putting Maya's needs above everything else. It meant lying about what Lila meant to him, to them. It meant reframing their connection as something casual and insignificant rather than the lifeline it had actually been. It meant winning by pretending to agree with Richard and Patricia that Lila was exactly what they'd accused her of being, a mistake he'd corrected. The thought made Ethan sick. But every time he considered refusing, he looked at Maya and knew he'd do whatever it took to keep her, even if it meant betraying the woman he loved. 2 weeks before the hearing, Maya stopped eating properly. She pushed food around her plate, claiming she wasn't hungry, that her stomach hurt, that nothing tasted good. Dark circles appeared under her eyes from nightmares she wouldn't talk about. Her teacher called to say Maya had been crying at school, couldn't focus on her work, kept asking if people could disappear without warning. "She's processing abandonment trauma," the school counselor explained when Ethan came in for an emergency meeting. First her mother's death, now the sudden departure of another significant female figure. She's afraid everyone she loves will leave, so she's starting to withdraw emotionally to protect herself. "What do I do?" Ethan asked, feeling helpless. "Consistency. Routine. Reassurance that you're not going anywhere. And honestly, Mr. Miller, if this Lila person was as important to Maya as it seems, finding a way to explain her absence in terms that make sense might help. Children need closure." But how could he provide closure when he didn't have it himself? When every day he hoped Lila would text or call, when he caught himself looking for her in crowds, when Maya's bedroom still had the art projects they'd made together hanging on the walls like ghosts of happier times? Jenny had offered to take Maya for a weekend, give Ethan some space to think. He'd agreed, desperate for a moment to breathe, to figure out how to navigate the impossible situation he was in. The house felt cavernous without Maya's presence, too quiet, too empty. Ethan found himself in her room, staring at a painting she and Lila had made together, a rainbow of handprints, Maya's small ones interspersed with Lila's larger ones, creating a pattern that looked like they were holding hands across the page. His phone rang. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. "Ethan?" Lila's voice rough like she'd been crying. "Please don't hang up." His heart lurched. "Where are you? Are you okay?" "I'm at a motel about 40 minutes away," she said. "I've been staying here since I left. I couldn't go far. Couldn't make myself actually leave town even though I know I should." "Come home," Ethan said immediately. "Please, Lila, come home." "I can't," she said, her voice breaking. "I can't be the reason you lose Maya. I won't." "You're not the reason," Ethan said desperately. "Richard and Patricia are the reason. Their inability to accept that I deserve to have a life beyond grief is the reason. You've done nothing wrong except exist in a way that doesn't fit their narrow definition of acceptable." "How is Maya?" Lila asked. "Is she okay? Does she hate me for leaving?" "She's devastated," Ethan said honestly. "She's stopped eating properly, having nightmares. The school counselor says she's processing abandonment trauma. She thinks everyone she loves is going to disappear." He heard Lila's sharp intake of breath, the sob she couldn't quite suppress. "I was trying to protect her," she whispered. "I thought if I left, if I removed myself from the equation, things would get better." "You thought wrong," Ethan said, not unkindly. Maya was right that day. You protect people by staying, not by leaving. We're not better without you, Lila. We're broken. Silence on the other end. Then, what do you want from me, Ethan? Because I can't keep doing this. Can't keep loving you from a distance while convincing myself it's for the best. I'm not that strong. Say, I want you to fight, Ethan said. I want you to stop deciding for all of us that you're not good enough or strong enough or worthy enough. I want you to come to the custody hearing with me and show the court exactly who you are. Someone brave and kind and irreplaceable. Someone Maya and I choose. Consequences be damned. They'll use it against you, Lila protested. You said your lawyer advised keeping distance. My lawyer advised what would make the case easiest to win, Ethan corrected. But winning by pretending you don't matter isn't actually winning. It's just a different kind of losing. And I'm done losing people I love because I'm too afraid to fight for them. He heard her crying openly now, not trying to hide it. I'm so scared, she admitted. Scared of hoping for this and having it ripped away. Scared of not being enough. Scared of all the ways my broken body and broken life could hurt you and Maya. Then be scared with us instead of alone, Ethan said gently. Come home. Let us figure this out together. Because I love you, Lila. I'm in love with you. And I think you deserve to know that before you make any more decisions about disappearing for our own good. The silence stretched so long he thought she'd hung up. Then, barely audible. You love me? Yes, Ethan said simply. I love you. Maya loves you. You're family. And family doesn't abandon each other when things get hard. I'm still at the Riverside Motel, Lila said, her voice trembling. Room 237. I don't know if I'm brave enough to come back yet. Then I'm coming to you, Ethan said, already grabbing his keys. Stay there, please. Just stay there. He drove faster than he should have, his heart pounding with hope and fear in equal measure. The motel was exactly what he'd expected. Cheap and worn, the kind of place people stayed when they'd run out of options. He found room 237 and knocked. Lila opened the door slowly, and the sight of her broke his heart. She'd lost weight she couldn't afford to lose. Her eyes were hollow with exhaustion and pain, and she was wearing the same clothes he'd last seen her in over 2 weeks ago. I look terrible, she said, a weak attempt at humor. You look like someone who's been carrying the weight of the world alone, Ethan said. Can I come in? She stepped back, letting him into the small room that had clearly been her prison for 2 weeks. Fast food wrappers in the trash, medication bottles on the nightstand, a sketch pad on the bed filled with drawings of Maya that had clearly been her only comfort. They stood facing each other, the space between them charged with everything unspoken. I'm sorry, Lila said first, for running, for deciding what was best without talking to you, for... Ethan closed the distance and kissed her, cutting off her apologies with the truth of what he felt. She froze for just a moment, then melted into him, her arms coming up to wrap around his neck like she was drowning, and he was air. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Lila was crying again. I love you too, she whispered against his lips. I've been so lonely without you, without Maya. This room is 40 minutes from your house, but it's felt like being on another planet. Then come home, Ethan said. Really home. Not just for dinner or movie nights, but home. Move in with us. Be part of our family in a way that's real and permanent and terrifying and worth it. The custody hearing, she started. We'll face it together, Ethan said firmly. We'll tell the truth, that you're someone we love who's become essential to our family, that Maya is thriving because of you, not despite you, that my in-laws' prejudices don't get to dictate who we care about. What if we lose? Lila asked, the fear raw in her voice. Then we appeal, Ethan said. And if that doesn't work, we figure out the next step. But we do it together. No more running. No more deciding you're not worth fighting for. Lila searched his face, looking for certainty in a situation that offered none. Finally, she nodded. Okay, she whispered. Together. I'm so tired of being alone. Then pack your things, Ethan said. Let's go pick up Maya from Jenny's and tell her you're coming home. I think she has some art projects she's been saving to show you. They left the motel room together, Lila's small suitcase in hand, and drove back toward town as the sun set over the highway. The custody hearing loomed ahead, Richard and Patricia's judgment waiting to fall. But for the first time in 2 weeks, the weight didn't feel quite so crushing, because they were facing it together. And maybe that would be enough. The reunion with Maya was everything Ethan had hoped for, and more. When they arrived at Jenny's house and Maya saw Lila getting out of the car, she'd frozen for just a moment, as if afraid to believe what her eyes were telling her, before running full speed across the lawn and launching herself into Lila's arms with enough force to nearly knock them both over. "You came back," Maya sobbed into Lila's shoulder. "You came back, you came back, you came back." "I'm so sorry I left," Lila said, holding Maya tight while tears streamed down her own face. "That was wrong. I should never have gone away without talking to you first. I was scared and I made a mistake." "Don't leave again," Maya demanded, pulling back just enough to look Lila in the eyes with the fierce intensity only children can manage. "Promise me. Even if you're scared, even if things are hard, you have to promise you won't leave again." Lila glanced at Ethan, who nodded his encouragement. "I promise," she said to Maya. "No more running away. We face hard things together from now on." "Good," Maya said, satisfied. Then she grabbed Lila's hand and started pulling her toward the house. "Come on, I made you something. I've been working on it every day since you left, and Aunt Jenny said it was very therapeutic, which I think means it helped me not be so sad." Jenny met them at the door, taking in the scene with the knowing eyes of someone who'd seen this coming from the beginning. She hugged Lila without hesitation, whispering something in her ear that made Lila nod and squeeze her back gratefully. What Maya had made turned out to be a drawing, but calling it just a drawing didn't capture the emotional weight of what Ethan saw when his daughter proudly held it up. She'd used every color in her marker set to create 3 figures holding hands: a tall man with dark hair, a little girl with curls, and a woman with long dark hair. Above them, she'd written in her careful second-grade handwriting, "Our family." "See?" Maya said, pointing to each figure. "That's Daddy, that's me, and that's you, Lila, because you're part of our family, and families stay together." Lila pressed her hand to her mouth, trying to hold back another wave of tears, but it was useless. She knelt down to Maya's level and pulled her into another hug. "Can I keep this?" she asked. "It's the most beautiful thing anyone's ever made for me." "It's yours," Maya said generously. "I made it for you so you'd remember to come home." "It worked," Lila said, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm home now." The week leading up to the custody hearing passed in a strange blur of normalcy and anxiety. Lila moved her few belongings into Ethan's house, taking the guest room despite Maya's vocal campaign for her to share Daddy's room, because that's what people do when they love each other. They established new routines that felt both comfortable and terrifying in their permanence. Lila helping Maya get ready for school in the mornings, the 3 of them cooking dinner together in the evenings, bedtime stories that usually resulted in Lila falling asleep in Maya's room alongside her. Monica Chen had been less than thrilled with Ethan's decision to have Lila move in before the hearing, calling it strategically inadvisable and exactly what the other side wants you to do. But when she met Lila in person, when she saw the 3 of them together and watched Maya's face light up every time Lila entered a room, her stance had softened slightly. "Okay," Monica had said after spending an evening at their house preparing testimony. "I see it. I see what you're fighting for. It's still going to be an uphill battle, but at least now I understand why you're willing to climb it." She'd coached Lila extensively on how to present herself in court, what questions to expect, how to frame her medical history and financial situation in ways that emphasized resilience rather than instability. Lila had absorbed it all with the focused determination of someone who understood that everything depended on the next few hours. The night before the hearing, after Maya was asleep, Ethan and Lila sat together on the back porch, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. The November air was cold enough to see their breath, but neither of them wanted to go inside yet. "I'm terrified," Lila admitted quietly. "What if I say the wrong thing? What if the judge looks at me and sees everything your in-laws see, someone broken and poor who doesn't belong in Maya's life?" "Then the judge is wrong," Ethan said, taking her hand. "But I don't think that's going to happen. I think when they see us together, when they hear Maya talk about you, they'll understand what Richard and Patricia refuse to see, that love and stability don't look just one way. I wish I had your confidence, Lila said. I have enough for both of us, Ethan assured her. Whatever happens tomorrow, we're in this together. That doesn't change. She leaned her head on his shoulder, and they sat in silence for a while, drawing comfort from each other's presence. Finally, Lila spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. Thank you, she said, for seeing me, for choosing me even when it would have been easier not to, for teaching me that I'm worth fighting for. Always, Ethan said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. You're always worth fighting for. The courthouse was exactly as imposing as Ethan had feared, all marble columns and echoing hallways that seemed designed to make you feel small and powerless. They arrived early, Monica wanting time to go over last-minute strategy before Richard and Patricia showed up with their legal team. Maya was with Jenny, who'd promised to take her to the zoo and keep her distracted until this was over. They'd explained to Maya that there was going to be a meeting where adults would talk about what was best for her, trying to frame it in terms that wouldn't terrify a 7-year-old. She'd been skeptical, but had hugged both of them fiercely before leaving with her aunt. Remember, Monica said as they waited in the hallway outside the courtroom, be honest but measured. Don't get defensive. Don't let them make you angry. The judge is looking for stability and mature decision-making. Show her that. Richard and Patricia arrived with their lawyer, a severe-looking man in an expensive suit who barely glanced at Ethan before conferring with his clients. Patricia looked through Lila like she was invisible, while Richard's expression was set in grim determination. They believed they were doing the right thing, Ethan realized. In their minds, they were rescuing their granddaughter from a father who'd lost his way. The courtroom itself was smaller than Ethan had expected, less dramatic than what television had led him to believe. Judge Margaret Harrison presided, a woman in her 60s with silver hair and sharp eyes that seemed to miss nothing. She reviewed the case file briefly before looking up at the assembled parties. This is a preliminary hearing to determine if there's sufficient cause to proceed with a custody modification, she said, her voice carrying the weight of years on the bench. I've reviewed the initial filings. Mr. Sterling, as the petitioners, your attorney may present your case. The Sterling's lawyer, his name was something pretentious, Ethan thought, something like Ashford or Kensington, stood and launched into an argument that painted Ethan as a man whose grief had led to poor judgment. He presented affidavits from neighbors who'd witnessed Lila's comings and goings at all hours, medical records obtained through questionable means that detailed Lila's injuries and ongoing health issues, financial records showing her part-time employment and reliance on disability payments. The concern here, Your Honor, is not that Mr. Miller is a bad father, Ashford or Kensington said smoothly. It's that he's a grieving father who has become involved with a woman wholly unsuited to help raise a young child. Ms. Hart has significant medical issues that require ongoing treatment and limit her ability to maintain stable employment. She lives in a high-crime neighborhood and survives on government assistance. Most concerning, she has inserted herself into this vulnerable child's life at a time when the child is still processing the loss of her mother. He made it all sound so reasonable, so obvious. Of course, a loving grandfather would be concerned. Of course, the responsible thing was to ensure Maya wasn't exposed to instability. When it was Monica's turn, she stood with quiet confidence. Your Honor, with respect to opposing counsel, they're painting a picture that bears little resemblance to reality. Yes, Ms. Hart has medical challenges she's met with extraordinary courage and resilience. Yes, she works part-time, because that's what her body allows. And she's built a life within those limitations rather than surrendering to them. And yes, she's become important to Maya Miller, because she's kind, patient, and has helped this child heal from the loss of her mother in ways that no amount of money or social status could accomplish. Monica called Ethan to testify first. Under her gentle questioning, he talked about the past 3 years, about the isolation he and Maya had experienced, about how Lila had entered their lives and brought light back into dark spaces. He spoke honestly about his feelings for her, about the decision to have her move in, about why he believed she made him a better father rather than a worse one. My in-laws see Lila's challenges as liabilities, Ethan said, looking directly at Judge Harrison. I see them as proof of strength. She's survived things that would have broken most people, and she's done it with grace and determination. She shows Maya every day that hardship doesn't define you, that you can face difficulty and still choose kindness. That's exactly the kind of example I want in my daughter's life. Under cross-examination, the Sterling's lawyer tried to shake him, suggesting his judgment was clouded by loneliness and desperation for adult companionship. Isn't it true, Mr. Miller, that you barely knew Ms. Hart before allowing her into your home? That you've made these decisions very quickly, without fully considering the impact on your daughter? I knew enough, Ethan said firmly. I knew she had a good heart. I knew my daughter connected with her in a way she hadn't connected with anyone since her mother died. I knew that sometimes the right thing doesn't follow a convenient timeline. When Lila took the stand, Ethan could see her hands shaking as she swore to tell the truth. But when Monica began questioning her, when she started talking about the accident and everything that followed, her voice grew steadier. She didn't hide from her circumstances. She owned them, explained them, made the judge understand that her life wasn't a cautionary tale, but a story of survival. I'm not going to pretend I'm wealthy or perfectly healthy, Lila said at one point. I'm not going to claim my life looks like what people expect or hope for. But I love Maya. I love her father, and I would do anything, sacrifice anything, to protect that child's well-being, including walking away if that's what was truly best for her. I tried that. I disappeared for 2 weeks because I thought my absence would solve their problems. You know what happened? Maya stopped eating properly, started having nightmares. Her teacher called because she was crying at school. My absence didn't protect her. It hurt her. Because children don't need perfect people in their lives. They need people who show up, who keep promises, who love them unconditionally. The Sterling's lawyer stood for cross-examination, and Ethan braced himself for the attack he knew was coming. Ms. Hart, isn't it true that your medical conditions are chronic and progressive? That they could worsen at any time, leaving you unable to care for yourself, let alone help parent a child? It's possible, Lila admitted. My doctors can't predict the future. What I can tell you is that I've learned to manage my limitations, to ask for help when I need it, to be honest about what I can and can't do. Those are skills I think are valuable for anyone, regardless of their health status. And your financial situation? You live on approximately $1,500 a month between disability payments and your part-time work, correct? Correct, Lila said, her chin lifting slightly. It's not much, but I've learned to make it work. I budget carefully. I don't waste money on things I don't need. And yes, sometimes I need help. Like when Ethan sends me home with leftovers, or when I have to use food pantries to get through the month. I'm not ashamed of that anymore. Needing help doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. But you can understand the grandparents' concern, the lawyer pressed, about exposing Maya to such financial instability, to a lifestyle so different from what her mother would have provided? This was the moment, Ethan realized, where Lila could either crumble or stand firm. He watched her take a deep breath, square her shoulders, and meet the lawyer's eyes directly. Maya's mother was killed by a drunk driver, Lila said, her voice clear and strong. She was young, healthy, financially secure, living the life everyone expected her to live. And it didn't matter. She died anyway. Life doesn't come with guarantees, regardless of how much money you have or how perfect your circumstances look from the outside. What Maya needs isn't someone who can promise her a life without hardship. That's a lie. What she needs is someone who will be honest with her about the fact that life is hard sometimes, that people face challenges, and that the way you handle those challenges is what defines you. I can teach her that. I live that every single day. The courtroom was silent when she finished. Even the Sterling's lawyer seemed momentarily at a loss for words. Judge Harrison was watching Lila with an expression Ethan couldn't quite read. Any further questions for this witness? The judge asked. No, Your Honor, the lawyer said, sitting down. Monica called one more witness, Maya's teacher, Mr. Peterson, who testified about the positive changes he'd seen in Maya since Lila had entered her life. Maya talks about Lila constantly, he said, about art projects they do together, about conversations they have, about how Lila helps her understand that it's okay to be sad sometimes, but that joy can exist alongside grief. Whatever Miss Hart's circumstances are, her impact on Maya has been overwhelmingly positive. When both sides had presented their cases, Judge Harrison called for a brief recess. Ethan, Lila, and Monica waited in the hallway, none of them speaking, all of them lost in their own thoughts about what might happen next. Jenny texted to say Maya was having a great time at the zoo, but kept asking when she could see Daddy and Lila. The normalcy of it, a child at the zoo, worried about normal things, felt surreal against the backdrop of adults in a courthouse deciding her fate. When they were called back in, Judge Harrison looked at both parties with an expression that had softened slightly from her earlier judicial neutrality. "I've heard testimony from both sides," she said, "and I want to be clear about something from the outset. Mr. and Mrs. Sterling, I understand you love your granddaughter and want what's best for her. That's admirable. However, love doesn't give you the right to dictate how a fit parent chooses to live their life or who they choose to include in their family." Ethan felt hope beginning to bloom in his chest, but he tried not to let it grow too much yet. "Mr. Miller is by all accounts a good father," the judge continued. "Maya is healthy, happy, doing well in school, and has been well cared for since her mother's death. The introduction of Ms. Hart into their lives is not grounds for concern. In fact, from what I've heard today, her presence has been beneficial to the child. Yes, Ms. Hart faces challenges, but challenges don't disqualify someone from being a positive influence in a child's life. Often, quite the opposite." She turned to look directly at Richard and Patricia. "I'm denying your petition for emergency custody. I see no evidence that Maya is in any danger or that Mr. Miller's parenting should be questioned. If you wish to pursue this further, you have the right to file a more comprehensive custody suit. But I'm advising you now that unless circumstances change dramatically, you're unlikely to succeed." Richard's face had gone red with anger, but Patricia looked more thoughtful, her eyes moving between Ethan and Lila with something that might have been the beginning of understanding. "Furthermore," Judge Harrison said, "I'm going to strongly recommend that all parties consider family mediation. You're all connected through Maya, and she deserves to have relationships with her grandparents that aren't poisoned by legal battles. Find a way to coexist peacefully, if not for your own sakes, then for hers." She rapped her gavel once. "This hearing is concluded." For a moment, Ethan couldn't quite process that it was over, that they'd won. Then Lila grabbed his hand, squeezing so tight he could feel her trembling, and reality crashed back in. Monica was smiling, collecting her papers with the satisfied air of someone who'd expected this outcome. Across the aisle, the Sterling's lawyer was conferring with Richard and Patricia in low, urgent tones. "Let's get out of here," Monica said quietly, "before they decide to say something everyone will regret." They were halfway down the courthouse steps when Patricia's voice called out behind them. "Ethan, wait, please." He turned slowly, Lila's hand still in his, prepared for one final confrontation. But Patricia's expression had shifted. The cold judgment had cracked, revealing something more complex underneath. "I'd like to talk," she said. "Not lawyers, not courtrooms. Just talk. The four of us. If you're willing." Ethan looked at Lila, who nodded slightly despite her obvious nervousness. "Okay," he said, "but not today. Today I'm going to go pick up my daughter and celebrate the fact that we get to stay a family. Call me next week. We'll arrange something." Patricia nodded, something that might have been regret flickering across her features. "I'm glad Maya gets to stay with you," she said quietly. "Truly, I wish I understood." "Maybe that's what talking is for," Ethan said, not unkindly. "Understanding." They left Richard and Patricia standing on the courthouse steps and drove to the zoo where Jenny and Maya were waiting by the penguin exhibit. When Maya saw them, she went very still for a moment, reading their faces for any sign of bad news. "We won," Ethan said simply. "You're staying with me, with us." Maya launched herself at both of them, laughing and crying simultaneously while Jenny documented the moment on her phone with tears streaming down her own face. Strangers at the zoo stopped to watch this small family reuniting, and several people were smiling, strangers recognizing joy when they saw it, even without context. "I want to see the pandas," Maya announced, when she'd finally calmed down enough to speak in complete sentences. "All of us together. Because we're a family, and families do things together." So they spent the rest of the afternoon at the zoo, watching pandas and sea lions and the incredibly serious-looking penguins that made Maya laugh until her sides hurt. Lila's limp was more pronounced by evening, her pain obviously worsening from all the walking. But she never once complained. Instead, she held Maya's hand and listened to running commentary about every animal they saw, and Ethan watched them together with a feeling in his chest that he'd thought he'd lost forever. That night, after Maya was finally asleep, exhausted from excitement and emotion, and possibly from talking nonstop for 6 hours, Ethan and Lila sat together on the back porch again. The November stars were brilliant in the clear sky, and the air smelled like frost and possibility. "I can't believe that's over," Lila said, leaning against him. "I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop, for someone to say there was a mistake, and we have to do it all again." "It's really over," Ethan assured her. "You're really staying." "I'm really staying," Lila repeated, like she was trying to make herself believe it. "For the first time in 4 years, I have a home, not just a place to sleep, but an actual home with people who want me there." "We don't just want you here," Ethan said, tilting her face up so he could look into her eyes. "We need you here. You make us better. You make this house feel complete in a way it hasn't since Sarah died." "I'm still terrified sometimes," Lila admitted, "that I'll wake up and this will have been a dream, that my body will fail me in some catastrophic way, and you'll realize I'm too much work, that—" He kissed her, cutting off the litany of fears before it could gain momentum. When they broke apart, he kept his forehead pressed against hers. "We're all terrified," he said. "That's just what love is. Being scared something will take away what matters most. But we don't let the fear win. We wake up every day and choose each other anyway. Can you do that?" "Yeah," Lila whispered. "I can do that." The weeks that followed the hearing settled into a rhythm that felt increasingly solid. True to her word, Patricia had called, and they'd met for coffee, just the four of them, no lawyers, and had the first honest conversation they'd had in years. It hadn't fixed everything. Richard remained skeptical, and Patricia's acceptance was cautious at best. But they were trying, making an effort to understand rather than judge. And that was something. They'd agreed to monthly dinners, neutral territory, nothing as fraught as that first disastrous meal, where Maya could maintain a relationship with her grandparents and everyone could learn to coexist. The first one had been awkward, the second slightly less so. By the third, Maya was chattering away to her grandmother about school, while Richard actually asked Lila about her work at the pharmacy with something approaching genuine interest. "I don't know if they'll ever really accept me," Lila had said to Ethan after that third dinner. "But at least they're trying. That's more than I expected." "They're learning what Maya already knew," Ethan had replied. "That family is about choosing each other, not about meeting some arbitrary standard of perfection." Maya's 8th birthday arrived in March, with a party that filled their backyard with children and chaos and laughter. Lila had spent weeks planning it with Maya, helping create decorations and organize games and bake what had to be the most elaborately decorated cake in second-grade history, a purple unicorn with a glitter-covered horn that Maya declared was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. Jenny had pulled Ethan aside at one point during the party, watching Lila help Maya's friends make friendship bracelets at the craft table. "She fits," Jenny said simply, "like she was always meant to be here." "I know," Ethan said, and the knowledge sat warm and certain in his chest. That night, after the last guest had gone home and Maya was asleep with a belly full of cake and happiness, Ethan found Lila cleaning up the remaining party debris in the backyard. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, and she looked up when she heard him approach. "I've been thinking," he said, taking her hand, "about something I want to ask you." Lila's eyes widened slightly, recognition and hope and fear all mixing together in her expression. "Ethan, I know it's fast," he said quickly. "I know we've only been together a few months, that conventional wisdom says we should wait, but I also know that I want to wake up next to you every morning for the rest of my life. I know that when I think about the future, you're in every version of it. I know that Maya already thinks of you as her family, and I want to make that official." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Lila's hand flew to her mouth, tears already gathering in her eyes. "I'm not promising you perfect," Ethan continued, opening the box to reveal a simple silver band with a small diamond. "I can't promise that our lives will be easy, or that we won't face challenges, or that everything will work out exactly how we hope. But I can promise that I'll show up, that I'll choose you every single day, that when things are hard, we'll face them together. He knelt down on one knee in their backyard, surrounded by leftover birthday decorations and the debris of celebration. "Lila Hart, will you marry me?" She was crying in earnest now, nodding before she could find words. "Yes," she finally managed to say. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." He slipped the ring on her finger. It fit perfectly, because Jenny had secretly taken Lila ring shopping weeks ago to get her size, and pulled her down into his arms. They stayed like that for a long moment, holding each other while the last light faded from the sky and the first stars appeared. "I can't believe this is real," Lila whispered against his shoulder. "That I get to have this. That after everything that's happened, I ended up here with you and Maya." "Believe it," Ethan said firmly. "This is real. We're real. And we're not going anywhere." From the house, they heard Maya's sleepy voice calling out, "Daddy? Lila? Where are you?" They went inside together, finding Maya sitting up in bed and rubbing her eyes. "I had a dream," she said, "that Lila had to leave again, and I couldn't find her." "I'm right here," Lila said, sitting on the edge of Maya's bed. "And I'm not going anywhere. In fact," she looked at Ethan, who nodded encouragingly, "I have something to tell you. Your daddy asked me to marry him, and I said yes." For a moment, Maya just stared at them, processing. Then a smile spread across her face that was brighter than all the birthday candles combined. "Really? You're going to be my mom?" "Not your mom, exactly," Lila said carefully. "Nobody can replace your mom, and I would never try. But I'll be your stepmom, which means I'll be part of your family officially and forever." "Forever?" Maya asked, needing the confirmation. "Forever," Lila promised. Maya launched herself at Lila with enough force to nearly knock them both off the bed. "Best birthday ever," she declared. "Best birthday in the whole entire world." They had a small wedding that June in Jenny's backyard, surrounded by the people who mattered most. Maya served as flower girl and ring bearer simultaneously, taking both jobs with the utmost seriousness. Even Richard and Patricia came, sitting in the front row with expressions that might not have been enthusiasm, but weren't hostility either. Progress, Ethan thought, came in small steps. As he watched Lila walk down the makeshift aisle, not given away by anyone because she'd given herself to this life, to this family, by her own choice and courage, Ethan thought about that October afternoon that felt like a lifetime ago. A stranger asking for a hug, a moment of vulnerability and honesty that had changed everything. "Can you give me a hug, please?" she'd asked, trembling and desperate and brave beyond measure. And he'd said yes. Such a simple word, such a profound choice. Everything that followed, the friendship and the love and the family they'd built together, had grown from that one moment of choosing kindness over fear, connection over isolation, hope over the safety of staying closed off. When Lila reached him at the front of the assembled chairs, she was crying, but these were happy tears, joyful tears, tears that spoke to the impossibility of standing here in this moment when 2 years ago she'd been convinced she would die alone and forgotten. "Hi," she whispered, taking his hands. "Hi," he whispered back. The officiant, a friend of Jenny's who'd gotten ordained online specifically for this occasion, began the ceremony, but Ethan barely heard the words. He was too focused on Lila's face, on the love and gratitude and disbelief that this was real, all mixing together in her expression. He was thinking about Maya sitting in the front row next to Jenny, beaming with pride in the purple dress Lila had helped her pick out. He was thinking about how family was something you built through choice and commitment, not just something you were born into. "I do," he said when it was his turn. "I do," Lila echoed, her voice steady despite the tears. And when the officiant pronounced them married and told him he could kiss his bride, Ethan pulled Lila close and kissed her like she was air and he'd been drowning for years, which he supposed he had been. They both had been. And somehow, impossibly, they'd found each other in the wreckage and decided to build something new. The reception was simple, barbecue and cake and dancing under string lights as the sun set. Maya monopolized Lila's attention for most of the evening, insisting on no fewer than 5 dances and asking repeatedly if she could call her Mom now, or if that was still too soon. You can call me whatever feels right to you, Lila told her during one of their dances. Mom, Lila, or something in between, whatever you choose is perfect. I think I want to try Mom, Maya said thoughtfully, and see how it feels. Is that okay? That's more than okay, Lila said, her voice thick with emotion. That's the greatest honor anyone could give me. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, as Maya finally fell asleep on a pile of coats in Jenny's guest room and the last of the string lights were unplugged, Ethan and Lila stood together in the quiet aftermath of celebration. We did it, Lila said softly. We actually did it. Did you doubt we would? Ethan asked. Every single day until today, Lila admitted. But I'm starting to believe now that this is real, that I get to keep it. You get to keep it, Ethan assured her, because I'm never letting you go. They drove home with Maya sleeping in the back seat, the simple gold bands on their fingers catching the streetlight as Ethan reached over to take Lila's hand. Tomorrow they'd start their life as an officially married couple, would navigate all the mundane and extraordinary moments that made up a shared existence. But tonight, driving through the quiet streets with his daughter and his wife, Ethan felt something he hadn't felt in years. Complete, whole, home. And it had all started with a hug, with a stranger brave enough to ask for what she needed, and someone choosing to say yes when it would have been easier to walk away. Sometimes, Ethan thought as he pulled into their driveway, the most extraordinary things began with the simplest acts of kindness. A hug freely given, a hand extended, a door opened when someone knocked. He looked at Lila, at this woman who'd survived so much and still chose courage over fear, love over safety, hope over despair. And he thought about all the people who'd told them this wouldn't work, that they were moving too fast, that Lila's challenges would be too much, or that grief had clouded his judgment. They'd all been wrong. Not because life was suddenly perfect, or because challenges had disappeared, but because they'd learned what Maya had understood from the beginning, that love isn't about perfect circumstances or ideal timing. It's about showing up, staying present, choosing each other again and again, especially when things are hard. As they carried their sleeping daughter inside and tucked her into bed, as they finally collapsed onto their own bed, exhausted and happy and married, Ethan pulled Lila close and felt her settle against him like she'd always belonged there. Thank you, he whispered into the darkness. For what? Lila asked sleepily. For being brave enough to ask for a hug that day, Ethan said, for giving us the chance to find each other. Lila was quiet for a moment, then he felt her smile against his shoulder. Thank you for saying yes, she whispered back, for seeing me when everyone else looked away, for choosing us. Always, Ethan promised. Every single time I'll choose us. And he meant it. Through whatever came next, good days and bad days, health and sickness, wealth and poverty, he would choose this family they'd built from hope and courage and one small act of kindness on an autumn afternoon. The woman who'd asked a stranger for a hug was sleeping peacefully beside him now, wearing his ring and his last name, safe and loved and home. And in the room down the hall, their daughter, his by blood, theirs by choice, was dreaming of rainbows and unicorns and a future filled with the kind of love that showed up and stayed. It was more than enough. It was everything. And it had all begun with someone being brave enough to ask for what they needed, and someone else being kind enough to give it. In the end, that was the story Ethan would tell when people asked how he and Lila met. Not the dramatic parts about custody battles and in-laws and overcoming prejudice, just the simple truth of that first moment. A hug requested, a hug given, and everything that followed, the laughter and tears, the challenges and triumphs, the ordinary and extraordinary moments that made up a life together, had grown from that single seed of connection. Proof that sometimes the biggest things in life started with the smallest gestures, that kindness rippled outward in ways you couldn't predict, that being brave enough to be vulnerable, to admit you needed something, to reach out even when rejection seemed certain, that kind of courage could change everything. Lila had changed everything for them, and they had changed everything for her. Not by fixing each other, broken people couldn't be fixed like machines with faulty parts, but by choosing to be broken together, to build something beautiful from the pieces of their shattered pasts. As sleep finally claimed them both, wrapped around each other in the darkness, Ethan's last thought was one of profound gratitude for second chances and brave strangers, for daughters who understood love better than most adults, for families built by choice and sustained by showing up even when it was hard, for one simple hug on an autumn afternoon that had led them all home.